IB Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Tuesday, December 10th. Trev and I were talking before the show, man. It feels like we haven't done a show together for a while. But the reality is we have done shows together recently. They just haven't been as much Notre Dame related, but we are back to talking Notre Dame football. Irish have a pretty big game coming up here next week. We are over a week away from Notre Dame hosting the first ever on-campus college football playoff game in history, which is pretty cool. That we will be a part of that, Trev. I'm very excited about that. I know you're very excited about that. But it's a big moment, big opportunity for Notre Dame. They play a very good Indiana team next week, and we're going to break that game down a lot over these next 2 weeks on the website, on the message board, and, of course, here on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. But first this week, Trev, you know, Notre Dame has this thing where Marcus Freeman talks all the time about, look, we're going to focus on us. We got to focus on our team. We got to focus on the golden standard, right? It's the TGS, the thing they yell at the end of every break. And that's really kind of where we are going to start our analysis of Notre Dame. And we're going to kind of take a big picture view of Notre Dame's units heading into the playoff and what we need to see from them, breaking down where they are, where they need to be, where are they good enough to make a run, where do they have to get better or show improvement, and where do they need to be at their best. And we'll do that today. So we're going to talk all things Notre Dame offense today. We're going to talk about, kind of look at the season overview. We're going to do a statistical breakdown of where they rank going into the season. We're going to talk about the things that we view are as building blocks of a championship run, stumbling blocks of a championship run as well. We'll talk about areas where the offense needs to thrive, areas where the offense needs to improve more specifically. We'll get into 3 keys to success for the offense, and we're going to have some fun with that. No mailbag today. If you guys want to ask us a question, go ahead and throw in a super chat. We'll get to that. But we're going to have some fun with this, Trev. And then tomorrow, we're going to sort of do a bit of a twofold deal. We're going to, for about 30 minutes tomorrow, we're going to do a little bit of a rundown of kind of a Notre Dame rundown of some different topics. We'll talk special teams. We'll talk about, breakout players, all that kind of stuff. And then we'll have a buy, so hold. And then Thursday, we will do the same thing for the defense. And then, of course, Friday is going to be our mailbag. So we're going to have a lot to discuss here these next few days, everybody. And then, of course, Saturday at noon, we will have our countdown to kickoff, where we'll preview Army-Navy. But then that's when we're going to do our big breakdown of the 4 first-round playoff games. Will be this Saturday at noon. It'll be Trevor and I. Sean Stiers is going to be with us. So we're going to have some fun breaking that down. And then starting Monday of next week, probably Monday, we are going to then take a deep dive into the Notre Dame-Indiana matchup specifically. So we'll talk Notre Dame. And in the mailbag and buy, so hold, if you guys want to talk about Indiana, if you guys want to talk about the matchup, we will answer those questions. So there'll be plenty of Indiana conversation. We're just going to start with Notre Dame and then build to the matchup against Indiana. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait to get into that and dive into all that, Trev. But, man, it's a great time to be a Notre Dame fan. It's just an exciting time because now it's like, look, all the talk has happened. Hey, we're good. We're not good. This team's good. This team's not good. Yes, this is a championship team. No, it's not a championship team. All that debate gets settled here over the next month. And that's where you want to be, right? You want to be on this stage with an opportunity to say, hey, listen, if we are that good, if we are that team, you get a chance to either prove it now or certain things get exposed that you got to go back to the drawing board and say, we got to get better here. And there's no better place to be. There really isn't.
I'm excited, man. I'm happy that the playoffs are here. I'm happy that the speculation is over. You and I were talking before the show about just why we like this playoff format. And you know what? Round 1, you're separating the good teams from the great teams. You move on to the quarterfinals, you're separating the great teams from the elite teams. Once you get to the quarterfinals, semifinals, you're separating those elite teams from those championship caliber teams. So, you already touched on it, but throughout this week and throughout next week, we're going to talk about what Notre Dame has to do to be considered a championship caliber team. But first, Brian, you know what we got to do. We got to talk about our friends over at MyBookie. So as you guys know, it's been a crazy season of football. And like we've talked about, the college football playoffs start in 2 weeks. The NFL playoffs start in a month, which is crazy. But before all of that happens, be sure to sign up with our friends over at MyBookie. So if you don't know where to start, try the risk-free Thursdays. Basically what that means is if you place a bet on Thursday through MyBookie and it doesn't hit for whatever reason, you get your money back. I always do it on Thursday Night Football. So this week, the Rams take on the 49ers in another divisional matchup. So be sure to check that out. If you don't know where it's at, check it out under the Bet Boosts tab. So if you need to take a break from sports betting, because sometimes I know I need to, but you still want to kind of get your gamble on a little bit, you can check out their live casino and play some blackjack right there from your couch. So if you have yet to sign up, make sure that you sign up using promo code IRISH. And what that's going to do is on your first deposit, MyBookie will double your money instantly. So if you deposit $10, they're instantly going to give you an additional $10 in bonus bets. So with the playoffs coming up, there's about to, MyBookie's about to roll out some killer promotions. But in order to do so, you have to make sure that you sign up with MyBookie. So bet anything, anytime, anywhere with our friends over at MyBookie.
So you have to take a timeout, or the missus tells you need to take a timeout from gambling? I'm curious which one is more prominent in the Trowbridge house.
I plead the fifth. I'm ready to talk about some Notre Dame football today, Brian.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. I'm excited to talk about Notre Dame football too, Trevor, and we're going to begin sort of our breakdown with the offense, because there's two ways we could have gone with this today, right? One is, look, start with the defense, because that's the side of the ball that for the most part has really driven this team's success this season, right? It's another year where the defense is just really, really good. But when the other way to go with it is, okay, which unit's success is most important to this team making a title run? I think we would all agree that the defense is good enough to win a title. There's going to be a game between now and the title game, if they get there, where the defense is just, it's going to be a lot like the USC game, it's just a bad matchup for them. It's just not their day. The other team is having a great day, where you're going to need the offense to pick up the slack. And even if your defense is great, your offense, perfect example, the Texas defense didn't lose them the SEC championship game. Their offense did. Their defense gave them chance after chance after chance after chance in the first half to put that game away, and the offense couldn't capitalize. So you're going to have games like that, right? If the defense holds Georgia to 22 or fewer points, you got to win that game. But that's only if your offense steps up. And so when you and I talked about, the shows for this week, Trev, it was basically, listen, the offense is going to have to play championship football. Like that's the side of the ball that's going to have to step up. And will Notre Dame's offense be able to rise to the occasion and play good enough for enough games to say, hey, you can go win this? Because here's the way it's going to work, Trev. If Notre Dame does, in fact, get to win a championship, I can promise you that, not promise you, with a great deal of certainty, I will say there will be a game where the offense is going to have to win the game. There will be a game where the defense is going to have to win the game because the offense doesn't have it. And then the other two games, you got to be good on both sides of the ball. And so that puts a lot more pressure on this offense to really raise their level of play now that they're facing better defenses, because what Notre Dame has not faced on offense in a long time is a defense that is not only coached well and executes at a high level, which they have, right? Army is that. Navy is that. But also has the athletes and the size and the power to say, hey, we can go toe-to-toe with you, Notre Dame. And that's what they're going to face over this next month, and it starts against Indiana, which is statistically one of the better defenses in college football. Then if they beat Indiana, they get to play Georgia, who also has a pretty good defense. And if they beat them, then they're going to have to play either SMU, Boise State, or Penn State, all of which who have pretty good defenses, especially Penn State has a pretty good defense. And then you get in a title game. Maybe it's in Oregon, maybe it's Ohio State, maybe it's Tennessee, maybe it's Texas. We don't know. There's a lot of good defenses in college football this year. Not a lot of truly great offenses, Trevor. So to me, a title is going to be won by the team whose offense can get hot during the playoffs. And that's where the pressure is on this Notre Dame football team and this Notre Dame offense is this group is going to have to step up. As we talk big picture, we'll get into the more specifics of it and all those type of things. This is the group. This is the side of the ball that ultimately is going to determine if this is a team who just gets to the playoff and gets beat. If this is a team that gets into the playoffs and wins a game, can they win a couple, or can they make a run all the way to the end? That's what we're going to find out, but that's what they're going to need to be.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you look at historically Notre Dame's in these types of games, right? When they reach the playoffs, when they reach a New Year's Six Bowl, the offense is the one that struggles to get going. Historically, and I understand the final scores might not reflect the defensive performance overall, but, the first game that comes to mind for me is 2018 Clemson. That game got blown open in the second quarter due to an injury. However, the offense was not able to help play any sort of complement to what the defense was doing. So for me, the way that I look at it, Notre Dame, in order to make a run at the national championship, has to play 4 games of good complementary football, to your point. Now, you alluded earlier to the USC game, which was the first game in their first 12 where the offense really had to, no matter what, you got to respond. You got to go out and respond. And I believe that that's a really good foundation for where they're at. Now, I also look at things as realistically as I possibly can. USC's defense is not going to be as good as Georgia's defense when they face them, right? USC's defense might not be as good or won't be as good as Indiana's when they face them. You know what I mean? But that type of mentality from the offense should spark a little bit of something in them to know that, hey, today the defense just doesn't have it. We've been in games before where we've had to pick up the slack. We've had to have no wasted possessions. We've had to score on back-to-back drives. They did that against Louisville. They did that against USC. So Notre Dame has a good foundation in order to do this. Now it's just building upon it. And, you and I are going to dive into what hopefully some of the key things that they are focusing on over this, bye week period before their game next Friday. Hopefully those are going to be the things that they're focusing on.
Well, the first thing this offense and this entire team needed was rest. And they got a lot of that during championship week. So I think Marcus Freeman said they didn't return to the practice field till Saturday. So they got their weightlifting in, but they didn't get to the practice field till Saturday because this has been a very long season for this offense. And as we kind of begin the look back, the breakdown of this offense, we got to talk about where it came from, Trevor, and what we've seen from this unit as we've gone through the season, because we're sitting here talking about now a team that finished the season ranked high in the national rankings. We'll dive into the statistical outlook now in a minute, but we're going to kind of talk about how they got there, because if you'd have told me at the end of September or going into that first bye, right, first Saturday of October, that Notre Dame is going to be a team that scores a ton of points and is top 5 national scoring team and all that other kind of stuff, I'm not going to lie to you, Trev. I'd have been like, yeah, you're drinking the Homer juice again. I don't know what's going on with you right now, but you're talking crazy talk right now, because they just weren't that. I mean, to start the season, Trevor, you're talking about a team that in their first 4 games only scored over 28 points once, and that was a 66-point outburst against Purdue. Their scoring average at the time wasn't bad through 5 games, Trevor, because they did have that blowout. But if you look at where they were the first 5 games of the year, they were at 32.4 points per game going into the bye. 32.4. Why? Because they had a 66-point outburst against Purdue. They were not a very good football team on offense. And then you look at the statistics. They had the 578-point outburst against Purdue. They went for 428 against Miami of Ohio. Now, come to find out, Miami, Ohio, and Northern Illinois had really good defenses for the Group of 5 level. But I don't care. You're still Notre Dame. Those are defenses. You score minimum 31 to 35 points on minimum. And they scored a grand total of 42 in those 2 games against MAC teams. They went for 286 against Northern Illinois, 280 against Louisville, and 356 against Texas A&M. Again, not an offense that was really lighting the world on fire. They had been held below 6 yards of play. Matter of fact, they had been held below 5.6 yards of play in 3 of their 5 games to start the season. And if you look at their current season average, they were held below their current season average of yards per play 4 of their first 5 games. So you look at it and you're thinking, okay, offense is struggling. Everyone on their mother wants Riley Leonard bench because he's struggling. You couldn't score on Northern Illinois. You couldn't score on Miami of Ohio. You needed a Riley Leonard fourth quarter 50-yard touchdown run to put that game away. Thank goodness your defense was balling out. Your offensive line had lost there by halftime of the 3rd game of the season. You had lost your starting left tackle, your starting center, your starting right guard. Your preseason All-American tight end was basically a catch here, a catch there, doing nothing. Your receiving core wasn't doing a whole lot, and your big-time transfer quarterback didn't look like he forgot how to throw football. I mean, that's the storyline going into the Louisville game. You started to see flashes going into the Louisville game, Trevor, but going into that game, we saw this football team start to get right. And coming out of it, very different deal. The offensive line, like I said, like it's kind of like this, Trev. There's always like little steps down, but the trajectory upwards was really good. You looked at what we saw from Riley Leonard. That got better and better and better and better as things went on. You look at the playmakers that started to step up and make more plays. There's, Mitchell Evans had some games here and there. They just slowly started to ascend, and they did so, Trevor, against a schedule that was a little bit interesting. Like it was a good schedule defensively. It had some good teams in it. Obviously, Georgia Tech was a pretty scrappy defense this season. They gave up 44 points to Georgia. They only gave up 24 in regulation. They gave up a bunch after, post-regulation, right? I mean, Navy's got a pretty decent defense this season. Stanford's defense isn't very good. Florida State's defense is not very good. Virginia's defense is not very good. Army's defense is very good. USC's defense is much improved. So it was a quality schedule, but not a gauntlet. And it was really a get-right opportunity coming out of the break with Stanford, Georgia Tech, and Navy. Because even though Navy has a good defense, it's good for the group of 5 level. It wasn't one that should stop Notre Dame. Georgia Tech had a scrappy defense, but it wasn't one that should have necessarily stopped Notre Dame. And they were able to go down during that stretch and do what we said they needed to do, which is get right. And coming out of that, Trevor, we saw a completely different offense. And then, of course, down the stretch, Notre Dame scored 51, 52, 35, 49, and 49 in their last 5 games. Had 2 pick sixes at the end of the USC game, but the offense scored 35 points in the first 3 quarters. I mean, it was 35-21 going into the fourth quarter. Had they not had 2 pick sixes, we don't know if the offense would have been able to go put a drive together. Only, I think, 2 possessions in the entire fourth quarter. One of them they started inside their own 10, right? So it was a little bit of a different animal, but there's no doubt about it. When you look at how they performed down the stretch, Trev, last 6-7 games, 477 yards, 385, 466, 453, 448, 462, 436 yards per play coming out of the bye, 7.2, 5.6, 7.2, 7.3, 6.3, 9.8, 7.2. If you look at that 5.58 total was the worst game of the last 7 games. That would have been their 3rd best performance of the first 5. Better than A&M, better than Northern Illinois, better than Louisville. And it was a different group. And a couple things we saw. Notre Dame was a very young team coming into the season on offense. 9 starters were freshman or sophomore eligibility. And the 2 that weren't were the senior transfers, right? Because Jordan Faison started, Jade Greathouse. And that group needed more time to get going. I think the biggest misread that I had coming into the season on the offense was I didn't put enough into Riley Leonard's missed time. I thought he'd be able to make up for the missed time that he had in the spring. And the offensive line injuries we could not have anticipated. So when you think about what we expected from this offense, I think those 2 things, one, we should have done a better job of anticipating. Although we did say, like, the offense is going to need time to hit its full stride. I just didn't think it was going to be that bad in the first month. Like, we knew it would need some time. I didn't know it would need that. The baseline to start would be that low, right? And then, of course, the injuries, I don't know how you can anticipate those. There's no way to anticipate those. But by the end of the year, this offense was a much, much better football team. And, you can talk about, how good are some of these teams and all that. Well, look, USC doesn't have a great defense, right? We talked about that, but nobody scored more than 35 offensive points against them. LSU had 20. Michigan had 27. Wisconsin 21. Minnesota 24. Penn State had 33. Needed overtime to do that. Maryland had 29. Rutgers 26, 20. Washington 36, Nebraska 20, UCLA 13, and Notre Dame scored 35 and basically had one real possession in the fourth quarter. Scored 49 as a team. 436 yards allowed was the second most they gave up all year. Penn State was the only one that went for higher, and they're 7.15 yards per play. They were the only team all season to go for over 7 yards a carry or 7 yards a play against USC. So that was the thing, is they were doing things to these defenses that nobody else was really doing, and that to me is really the mark of how do you gauge where you are. And that's what we saw as we kind of looked through the course of the season, was just a tremendous amount of growth from this group as we went through the campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the journey that Notre Dame's offense went on this season was, one, very stress-inducing for myself personally, but it leaves a lot of room for excitement, because sometimes you look at a team, and where we were at before the bye week was, I mean, how much better is this offense going to get? Is this kind of what it's going to look like for the rest of the year? Because in 2022 and 2023, that's kind of where we were at. In 2022, there came a point in the season where it was just kind of, yeah, this is what this offense is going to do. We know what they're going to do. We know what they're going to roll out there on Saturdays. In 2023, it was, okay, we know where this offense is at. They're going to ball out on the bad teams, and they're going to struggle against the good teams. And for Notre Dame's offense this year, for the first in every game leading up to the Louisville game, it was a lot like that. It was a lot of, well, here we go again. And here goes this offense that's going to, do some good things just because they have the athletes there to do it. They have Jeremiah Love. They have Jadarian Price. Riley Leonard's a great runner. But I didn't really know if this is going to be an offense that could go toe-to-toe with somebody in a shootout, or, really put football games away like they showed that they could down the stretch. But you and I talked a lot around where they come out after their first bye week is going to be huge for this team. If they come out after their first bye week and it looks eerily similar to what happened in the first 5 games, Notre Dame is going to be a bubble playoff team. And if they get in, we got question marks around the first round, right? Now, looking at where they're at and the growth that they were on, it leaves a lot of room for excitement. Not saying that they're a finished product, but what leaves me excited is the stride that they made in their first bye week, which was literally just an additional week of time. Now, Freeman and Denbrock and Dylan McCullough and Mike Brown and all of these guys on offense now have essentially 2.5 weeks to get their offense fine-tuned, geared up, ready for a playoff run. So I think it leaves a lot of room for excitement. And about the USC game, one thing that I think is funny, you mentioned the final score being 35-21. Jaden Mayava was responsible for all 28 points that were scored in the fourth quarter. It's just 14 of those went to Notre Dame. Yeah. It's just crazy to look at where that score was, going into the fourth quarter. But Notre Dame's offense, they're poised to take an additional step. We just don't know how big it's going to be. We have ideas of what they need to do to get there. But as of right now, it remains an unknown, because ultimately we can speculate all we want to. We're going to find out a lot on December 20th of where they're at.
Trev, when you look at the offense and kind of where it came from, I think your point about the type of team they were coming out of the bye is very well said. And you look, just the numbers say it. And I even think that first game against Stanford, it took them a little bit of time. Like the first quarter, they were moving the ball, but they kept shooting themselves in the foot. You're driving, Riley takes off on a big long run. You're right around the red zone is where he went out. You get a holding penalty, takes you back. He hits a really nice completion. Bo Collins is doing it after the catch, and then he fumbles. It's like that was and still is a big part of this offense's the problems, and we'll dive into that. But you could see it a little bit. And the biggest thing is, as you mentioned, Mike Denbrock coming out of that bye was a different offensive coordinator. Not in he believed in different things, but it was more of a coming out of that bye, he had a much better idea of who his offense was. He had a much better idea of, okay, we do this well. We don't do that well. Riley's good at this. He's not good at that. We can protect this. We can't protect that. There were a lot of those things that you saw it with the RPO, the jump in RPO usage and effectiveness. We saw it with mix-ups in the run game, how they're using the run game. We saw it with the pass game, some different concepts that they were trying to do a lot early that they just stopped doing, or they found different ways to do. That's good coaching. And that's what this staff did. And Mike Denbrock is a different coordinator, but I think it's a group effort. I mean, your whole staff is a part of that process. And that's really what this came down to for me, Trev, is that's good coaching. Instead of saying, hey, this is who we are, this is who we want to be, this is what I believe in as a coordinator, so let's roll, and it's up to you to figure it out. Coming out of the bye, they said, okay, this is where we'd like to be, but we're not there right now. We are here, and we've got to coach to what we are. We don't have big-time playmakers as a receiver. We thought we brought in some guys. We thought we had some young guys who could step up. They're just not that who we thought they were maybe. Our stud tight end is just not 100%. You could see it early in September. We have great running backs. We have an offensive line that struggles to pass block, but is really good at run blocking. We have a quarterback that's a really good runner. You saw, and then the other thing too is you saw a lot less of Riley Leonard being the focal point of the run game, which we saw early in the season, and that benefited as well. And then, of course, as we'll dive into more, the big thing that we saw different coming out of that break is the run game. And here's a stat for you. Notre Dame went over 200 yards rushing in all but one game after the first bye, and that was Georgia Tech. They went for 168. That was an impressive performance, but that was Mike Denbrock leaning into this is who we are, this is what we do well. And they did it for a period of time, and they've been over 230 in each of their last 3 games. So it is certainly an impressive stretch there for the offense. And as we kind of do a dive into the season rundown, Trev, before we get into what this team needs to do and improvements and strengths, let's just take a quick look at their overall view. I want to answer a question in the chat, though somebody did have, as we dive in this statistical thing. Riley Leonard has already tied the school record for rushing touchdowns by a quarterback. He tied Brandon Wimbush, who previously set the record at 14 in 2017. Deshaun Kaiser's number 2 with 10, and so he has already set that record, tied that record, and he just needs one more, obviously, to set that record here in the postseason. But just something to keep in mind. And then the all-time rushing touchdowns in a season record is, let's see here, that is going to be, okay, rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. All right, I got this they gave us this great little, Notre Dame gave us this records book at the beginning of the season. It's all the program records in it, which is flipping awesome. But most rushing touchdowns in a season is, let's see here, those are single game records. Let's go to season records. Most rushing touchdowns in a season. I thought Audric said it last year, right? I'm looking for it. Yes, Audric said it last year at 18. So right now, Jeremiah Love is tied with Autry Denson for 7th. If he gets hurt, if he gets one more, he'll tie for 4th. If he gets 2 more, he'll be tied for 2nd. 3 more, he'll tie Audric Estime's record. I don't think that I've ever seen a season where you had a quarterback and a running back go for 10-plus touchdowns in a season. But, yeah, it's been a very impressive performance. Notre Dame has never had 2, I'm looking at this now, they've never had 2 players in the same season go for 10 or more touchdowns. So it's impressive performance. So, Trev, it should not shock you then that Notre Dame is actually, you know what? Let me pull this down because those are not the proper statistics here real quick. I did those, give me a second. I copied the wrong thing, so just give me 1 second here. So get this fixed here because those rushing numbers I gave you, I don't know where I gave you the old rushing numbers instead of the new rushing numbers. That is where they were a while ago. So let me put the new numbers in there and we'll get that rolling.
In 2017, sorry to just kind of touch on this.
Okay, do it. Then I can get this fixed.
It's weird to think that in 2017, when Brandon Wimbush had 14 rushing touchdowns, Josh Adams didn't get 10.
Yeah. He was at 9, I believe.
Gotcha.
But the thing about it is they were all long touchdowns.
Sure.
So he had 9. Man. But like you think of dude, I remember this run, I remember that run, I remember that run, I remember that run.
Yeah.
They were all long touchdowns.
True.
But yeah, he only had 9 rushing touchdowns that season.
That's weird. And Jadarian Price has 7.
Yeah,
I mean, depending on what happens in the playoffs,
right.
I mean, that Notre Dame could have 3 rushers with over 10 rushing touchdowns.
Well, keep in mind, Josh didn't score a touchdown in the last 5 games of the season. He didn't, because remember, he got banged up. He didn't score a rushing touchdown in the last 5 games of the season. So, yeah, it was he did not finish as strong as he obviously performed early in the season. That's for sure. So I'm going to go ahead and get these fixed here, Trev, and make sure that I'm giving you guys accurate numbers. Obviously, that's always a plus, right? Getting accurate data. So just bear with me. But you look at it, Trevor, the one thing is that we were asked this question a lot coming into the season, right? Okay, can Notre Dame go out and be a team that can score 40 points a game?
Right.
And my answer honestly was probably not. I don't really know if they're that. They might get close, and that's exactly what they were. They certainly got close. They got very close this season. Yeah. And 39.8 is where they're at going into the postseason.
Number 3 in the country. They're at 42.0 against Power 5 opponents.
Yeah. So just give me a second, Trev. I'm going to have this number up here real quick.
Yeah. Now, I mean, it's interesting to think about when you bring that up, because we talk about the roller coaster ride of this season. And if you would have asked me before week 1, right, going into fall camp, do I believe that this is an offense that could score over 40 points a game? I think my answer would have been yes. And then through the first 4 games, really the first 5, I was like, no. And because you saw glimpses of it against Louisville, you know, they had that 21-point first quarter, and then I think they had 62 total yards of offense between the second and the third quarter. So yes, kind of, no, kind of. And then out of the bye, like we've talked about, there was just an explosion of offense. And I think you hit the nail on the head, man. I mean, it's a testament to really, really good coaching. Mike Denbrock was able to maximize what he had. That's the mark of really good coaching. And I'm not going to dive too much into it now because we're going to talk about them all next week. But you want to talk about maximizing your players' potential and getting players to perform above their God-given ability, things that Marcus Freeman preaches. That's why IU's so good this year, man. I mean, it's a testament to really good coaching on either side. You know, for Indiana, it kind of started from jump because we saw the run that they had went on really up until they had played like that offensive run and that offensive output really until they played Michigan a couple weeks before Ohio State. So it's, you know, like I said, it's a testament to really, really good coaching. IU just started off a little bit quicker than Notre Dame, but once Notre Dame got their feet under them.
Well, it is kind of interesting when you talk about it compared to that team because they scored 77 points in an early game. They were over 40 multiple times going into that game. Yeah. So, and I'm going to be able to pull up the statistics here real quick and get them to you. So give me 1 second. I was looking at those like, yeah, that's not right. Those numbers definitely don't look right. All right, here we go, Trev. We actually have real numbers now. So let's look at where Notre Dame was statistically this season. Finished the season 3rd in scoring offense at 39.8. That number just requires a little bit of conversation, Trevor, because one thing about Notre Dame is they had 6 defensive touchdowns this season. And so sometimes, and if you take off the points for that, and they had one time where they missed an extra point, the offense itself, just the offense alone, was at 36.4 points per game. That would rank them 14th nationally. Then my counter to that is if only they would have made half of their missed field goals, they would have been, so that'd be 15 more points. They would have been at, because they were 8 of 18. If they made half of their field goals and only went 13 and 18, you and I discussed this last night, 13 and 18 is okay. It's not great. If they just would have gone 13 of 18 and also made the one extra point they missed because their third string kicker was in the game, they would have averaged 37.8 points per game, which would have ranked them 7th. So the defensive scoring vaulted them up to 3rd, but they're an elite top 10 scoring offense just on what the offense has done alone. And you kind of have to take that a little bit nuanced because just because the defense scored doesn't mean the offense wouldn't have scored had they got the ball.
Sure.
That's the thing about it. And so when you look at those numbers, even if you take every single defensive touchdown away, even if you don't give them any credit for any extra points or missed field goals had there not been injuries, this is still the number 14 scoring offense in the country if you take all those things away. And that doesn't even include looking at other teams who also had special teams touchdowns, defensive touchdowns, things along those lines.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, that's assuming that you're still counting every other team's defensive touchdowns, special teams touchdowns, and you're taking Notre Dame's away from that. So, that's what I was going to hit on.
So we go into the overall numbers. This is an interesting one because they rank only 40th overall in total offense at 421.3 yards per game. And so you say, well, 40th overall, that kind of puts that scoring number a little bit into proper context, doesn't it? They're actually about 11 yards fewer per game than last year. Well, that's why I always include yards per play, because I think that is a much better statistic to measure your offense's effectiveness than total yards, because total yards doesn't tell you what your field position like. You know what I mean? There's a lot of times where you're not getting the ball. You're getting the ball at midfield. You can only get 50 yards. Or if you got it on your 10 and went on a scoring drive, you get 90 yards. So I think the 6.7 yards per play is a better example of where they are. And I think the 6.7 yards per play, despite ranking, look at that number to the right, 71st in yards per pass attempt, speaks volumes about how good this offense actually is. Because their rushing yards per play is not a whole lot different than their passing yards per play, which is good and bad, and we'll talk about both. But this is a team, as you can see, Trev, by the numbers, is vaulted by its run game. And here's the interesting thing about the run game. Notre Dame doesn't really have that one crazy number or two crazy games that kind of vault the number. So if you actually look, like, for example, when I think of the 2017 run game, which was the best I've ever seen at Notre Dame in my lifetime. I mean, that was just still, to even now with this group, still the best one that I've seen. They had a 515-yard performance. They had a 442-yard performance. They had a 380-yard performance, a 377-yard performance. This team only went over 300 yards one time. And that was 362 against Purdue. They only went over 270 yards 2 other times. What made this team so good running the football, Trev, was the consistency with which they ran the football effectively. And you look at that 2017 team, which was great, and I'm only comparing this unit to that because it fits when you're talking about how good is it. You compare it to the best you've seen. That team that year, Trev, went over 200 yards 7 times. Actually went over 300 yards 7 times, but over 200 yards 7 times. And when you look at this football team and the way that they've performed, they actually went over 200 yards 8 times. Now, they only went over 300 once, but they went over 200 8 times. That doesn't include another game in which they went for 198 and another game in which they went for 168. So when you look at the numbers, Trev, it's like they did this consistently. Whereas when you look at the 2017 offensive line, which I think was hurt because of the fact they just did not have a legit, like, this team throws the ball way better than the 2017 did. Way better. This team has much better running backs, in my opinion, which is debatable. Some can have, than that 2017 team, especially when it comes to making people miss. But that team was held below 175 yards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times that year. This team was held below 175 yards 3 times. Right? So it's the consistency with which we've seen this offense perform. Ranked 10th nationally in yards per game at 224.8. They rank 3rd in the country in yards per carry. It's at 6.3. It should be noted that their rushing offense, also the 6.3, is number 1 amongst Power 5 teams. The only teams higher are New Mexico and Boise State. Boise State with Ashton Genty is at 6.32. Notre Dame is at 6.30. The next closest Power 5 team is a Big 12 team, Kansas State, at 5.86. So if my math is – actually, let me just do the math here real quick so I don't say something then and look like an idiot because my math is correct. Let's see here. So what's 6.3 minus 5.5? I keep hitting the wrong button. So let's go 6.3. I'm having a tough technological day today, Trev. 5.86, so that's 0.44. Yeah, so I'm correct. Notre Dame is closer to being number 1 than number 4 is to Notre Dame at number 3. They're 0.37 behind number 1. They're 0.44 ahead of number 4. To put into context where that ranking is, rushing touchdowns, Notre Dame ranks 3rd in rushing touchdown or 5th in rushing touchdowns at 40. 2 of the teams that are ahead of them have played one more game. Boise State's at 42, Jacksonville State's at 48. Notre Dame only has one Power 5 team that ranks ahead of them in rushing touchdowns. That's Bama at 41. And Bama has 31 more carries than Notre Dame. So Alabama this year rushed for 41 touchdowns. Notre Dame rushed for 40. Notre Dame ran for 2,698 yards. Bama ran for 2,192. And Notre Dame did that in 31 fewer carries. They averaged 6.3 yards per carry. Bama was at 4.78. So it just puts into context how explosive this running game was. They ranked 26th or 12th in the country in rushes of 20 yards or more. What I find fascinating, Trev, about that is the further you go out, the higher Notre Dame ranks. So they rank 12th in runs of 20 yards or more. They rank 3rd in runs of 30 yards or more, which I found fascinating. And they rank 2nd in runs of 50 yards or more. So actually, the further you go out, the more explosive, like the more impressive it becomes, and how good this run game has been. That's been really the fuel that has really it's really driven this offense this season.
Yeah, I think that's what makes this rushing attack so dangerous. Not only is it consistent, they can also take one to the house on any given play. And typically when you talk about home run backs, you're talking about either a guy or two that, you know, they might go 1 yard, loss of 2, gain of 3, gain of 62, right? For Notre Dame's offense, it is a lot of, you know, gain of 4, gain of 5, you know, gain of 1, gain of 12, then gain of 17, then gain of 22. And so, you know, I think it's a testament to 4 and 24 from the home run perspective, but you touched on it earlier in the show. The offensive line in run blocking is a testament to how consistent this running game is, right? How Notre Dame's offensive line is in the running game, and the combination of the running backs that they have makes them extremely dangerous. That's, I mean, very, very high on this Notre Dame rush game for sure.
Third down offense has been one of the problem areas. We'll dive more into that here in a little bit. They rank 87th there. And then you have the complete opposite kind of storyline over on the other side. And, you know, passing yards per game, they rank 196.4. They rank 101st, rank 71st in yards per attempt, 114th in yards per completion, 60th in passing touchdowns. They have not turned the ball over a lot. That's obviously a positive. Notre Dame has 5 interceptions on the year. That ties them for 6th nationally. The interesting thing about that, Trevor, is you've had 2 in that set game against Northern Illinois. They've only had 3 of them since then. You had 1 against Georgia Tech, 1 against Virginia, and 1 against USC. And so they have done a good job of protecting the football in the pass game, because if you're not going to be a dynamic pass game, you better protect the football.
Right.
They rank 38th in the country in pass efficiency, which is a good indication of their pass game is competent beyond what the numbers may show, because they just don't throw it a lot, and they especially haven't done so the last just 5-6 games. You know, when you look at it that regard. For example, Notre Dame ranks 101st in passing yards per game. They rank 105th in passing attempts this season. So they haven't thrown the ball a ton. And that also factors in why they rank 22nd in sacks. That's a good ranking, but it's not indicative of the struggles they've had protecting the quarterback, because, you know, Riley Leonard saved you a lot of sacks from making people miss. And then when you think about the fact that you rank 22nd, but you rank 105th in pass attempts, it kind of tells you a little bit about that. And then red zone offense this year, it's a very weird number, Trev. So they rank 74th in red zone offense. It's not good, right? Not good. That's driven not by the offense. That's driven by the special teams, because they've had so many misses on field goals. If you look at touchdown percentage, Notre Dame ranks 10th in touchdown rate in the red zone. That's more indicative of how their offense is. And we'll talk more tomorrow about that special teams number, because I don't know that I've ever seen a team rank. I've seen teams rank like in the 70s in touchdown red zone offense, and then 10th in red zone offense because they kick a lot of field goals. I don't know that I've ever seen a team rank this low in red zone offense and rank 10th in red zone touchdown offense. That says that your special teams are a problem. And we'll dive more into that tomorrow. But that 10th is a good number. And then, of course, Notre Dame ranks 25th in the country when it comes to turnover margin.
One question that I do have about the turnover margin is, are they also factoring in special teams? Because I saw a stat somewhere that Notre Dame's running back room only had one fumble lost all year. And then I know Bo Collins had one, and then Riley Leonard's 5 interceptions. But I know Max Hurlman muffed a punt. There's been some muffed kickoffs. Like, is special teams factored into that?
I do believe it is factored in, yes.
Okay.
And of course, like you said, they've had those turnovers. So you have the 5 interceptions plus let me see here real quick. So Notre Dame as a team has had 5 interceptions, all by Riley Leonard. So that's 5 of the 12.
Yeah.
You had the muffed kickoff against Louisville.
Yeah.
Right. You had, I'm trying to think.
Fumble against Louisville.
That was an offense. I'm trying to think of the special teams ones.
Yep.
You had the muff fumble against, I know Max Hurlman had one. When did he have his?
Virginia.
So that's 2. Yeah, Jadarian Price fumbled one. But like you had, like I believe, Bo Collins had a fumble. I know Jordan Faison had a fumble. I believe Riley lost a fumble. Remember that he had that long run against Miami of Ohio where they came up behind him and stripped the ball out.
That's right. Yeah.
So like they've lost fumbles. Just haven't been from the running backs. Jadarian Price has been the only one that's fumbled from the running back room. I'm going to go try to find the Notre Dame statistics here to find out who lost the fumbles. But yeah, special teams, receivers, and quarterbacks are a big reason why their fumble number is as high as it is.
Okay.
Because they've lost 7 fumbles this season, and I do believe that includes that does include special teams as well. And I'm actually going to look that up kind of while we're talking about this.
Okay, cool. I wanted to make sure. I assumed if, points per game was also factored in by defensive and special team scored. I assume that turnovers were as well, but the old saying about assuming. So
yes.
Just wanted to make sure.
I definitely get it. So that Trev, that's kind of just statistically. Give me your thoughts on the statistics for the Notre Dame offense as we kind of go through this.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think this is going to lead perfectly into the things that they need to do well in the playoffs and the things that they need to improve upon. I think you can look at this graphic right here, and I've already seen people in the chat kind of break things down and talk about where Notre Dame needs to win in the playoffs and in the postseason, and the areas that they have to improve. Most notably the running game once again for Notre Dame, and it's an ideology of Marcus Freeman, but the run game has proven to be kind of the go-to card for Notre Dame on offense. And we talked about this for I believe it was our game day show, about how teams that kind of win the day and teams that won the day were teams that were able to rush the football. You look at Arizona State with Cam Scatterbo. You look at what Georgia did in the second half against Texas. Penn State was able to stay in that game because they had 2 guys go for over 100 yards. Oregon established, I think they had like 180 yards or something on the ground, something like that in a game like that. You look at, SMU, the moment might have been too big for them, but Clemson let them crawl back into that game because they rushed for 64 yards on the ground off of like 30 attempts. So the rushing game is going to be huge for Notre Dame in the postseason, right? And then you look at the other side and you look at the passing game, which I know we're going to dive into, so I won't break that down too much. But, third down, you have to be better. Red zone touchdown conversions, to be honest with you, I like where they're at. It's just we'll dive more into that on Wednesday. Turnovers, keep taking care of the football. Riley Leonard's done a really good job of that this year. The one thing that I will add to this, and I know we'll talk about it more in key improvements, but there's no stat on here for it, is those drive-killing penalties. Those penalties early in the downs that get you behind the sticks and they put you in 1st and 20, 1st and 25, 2nd and 15. Those are going to be other ones where we talk around key improvements that are things that are going to have to be essentially eliminated in the playoffs because there can be no wasted possessions once you get into the postseason. So, but overall, statistically, it paints a really good picture of where Notre Dame is at and where they need to be moving forward.
So Trev, as we look at the fumbles on the season, so you lost 2 against Miami of Ohio. And those were, you had the long Riley Leonard fumble, and then Jordan Faison also lost a fumble in that game on a punt. I believe that was also on a punt. Then you lost 2 fumbles against Louisville. That's the kickoff return by Devin Ford to start the game, and then Jadarian Price. That's the one running back fumble. So you have a quarterback, 2 special teams, and a running back. Your next fumble came against Stanford. That was Bo Collins. It was a receiver fumble. Then you had the punt return fumble by Max Hurlman against Virginia, and then you had the Jaden Thomas fumble against USC. So you had a quarterback fumble, you had 1 running back fumble, 2 receiver fumbles, and then 3 special teams fumbles. So special teams has been a problem for Notre Dame this year in a lot of ways. That's going to have to get cleaned up. But the other one is the receivers. I mean, you can't have receivers losing balls like that. Your ball carriers, your heavy ball carriers, your guys at running back and quarterback that combined for, 258 plus another 89 for those. So that's 258 for Jeremiah and Riley. You had another 89 for Jadarian plus 57 for Aeneas and Kedron. That's 404 carries, actually another 13 for Devin Ford. So your quarterbacks and running backs had 417 carries. They fumbled the ball twice. Your receivers on the season only caught 215 passes and fumbled the ball 3 times. Like, you can't have – one of them was on special teams. You can't have that. You can't have that. And so that's going to be a big part of it. But it hasn't been as big of an issue lately. On offense. You did have the one by Jaden Thomas, but it kind of came as a surprise when it happened, honestly. It was like, whoa, what just happened? Because the Notre Dame offense hadn't lost a fumble since the Louisville game.
Yep. And
Stanford game.
Game. And obviously I'm a huge proponent of ball security, but that was also a really good play by the USC defender. So obviously, end of the day, the ball's in your arms. You got to have good ball security, but that was also a really good punch out by that USC defender coming from behind. So, look, if there is one, I'm not saying that I'll live with any turnover, but at least it wasn't something as, the Jadarian Price one earlier in the year was tough. It wasn't a muffed punt, So, good play by a defender. I'll give you a mulligan, I suppose.
Yeah. And just so people are clear, we're talking about fumbles that were lost.
Yep.
Not fumbles that that just times fumbled, because there were, Jeremiah had one had fumbled in the end zone, remember, early in the year, and recovered it. So they've had a couple other fumbles, but those are the ones that they lost.
Yeah.
So that's a look at Notre Dame statistics, Trev, before we get to the next part of the show. Just kind of a look at where they are, where they came from. So sort of a present to look back kind of situation. And then in the next segment, we'll talk about what comes next. But before we get to that, folks, do us a favor, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that. If you've not done so, make sure that you sign up for us on the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And it's a great community over there. A lot of talk going on about the season. There's some recruiting talk going on. People talking about selling tickets, buying tickets. There's some people trying to sell tickets on the board. It's a great place to be. And it's also the best way that you can support Irish Breakdown. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Trev, as we get into part 2 of today's show, this is going to focus more on where Notre Dame kind of needs to kind of get better. And then we talk about where this team is right now. And when I look at where this team is right now, Trev, and we talk about what are the building blocks for a championship, what are the things that we look at right now and say, these are the specific areas where we think this team can be a championship football team. What are they that we know of right now? And it really begins with the combination of just everything that goes into the run game. You talk about the performance of the offensive line over most of the season in the run game has been good. Not always efficient, but explosive. And then, of course, you have the best 1-2 punch at running back in the country. I mean, that's really what it what it comes down to in this situation, Trevor, is when you have a 1-2 punch like this, you're just not going to. You're going to be really good rushing the football. You just are. This is as dynamic of a group as you're going to find. I mean, how many teams can say, hey, we have a running back that in only 134 carries this year rushed for 949 yards and 15 touchdowns. He went for 7.1 yards per carry. And oh, by the way, he's not our most explosive back from a yards per carry standpoint. He's not our most explosive back from a 50-plus yard runs and touchdown standpoint. Think about that. That's Jadarian Price. Think about that 1-2 punch. 7.1 per carry for Jeremiah, who's really emerged as a rising star in college football, really over the second half of the season. What's wild is he had that 109-yard game against Purdue, but you get into the Navy game, you're about to get into your second bye, and he's only had one game where he had 100 yards. Well, he changed that quite a bit down the stretch, Trev. He went for over 100 yards in 3 of the last 5 games, and if he doesn't get knocked out early in the third quarter of game 3, he has a fourth one. He had 99 yards on 13 carries and then didn't finish the game. So if he finishes that game, he's over 100 yards in 4 of the last 5 games. And so when he goes down, Jadarian Price is like, I got you. I'll go get the 100-yard game. He has his first 100-yard game of his career. And then, of course, Riley Leonard, who was one of the better running quarterbacks this season in college football, as far as like non-option type of quarterbacks, he does what he does this season. Jeremiah finishes with 949 yards. Riley finishes with 721 yards. Jadarian Price finishes at 6.51 yards. Riley Leonard was at 5.81 yards per carry. What's crazy about that is there's a lot of years where that would have been your best ball carrier of anyone that had decent number of carries. I mean, we always talk about how good Kyron Williams was in 2020 and 2021. Kyron Williams was at 4.93 yards per carry in 2021. He was at 5.3 in 2020 behind a really good offensive line. And you look at that, you think of how good Dexter Williams was at 6.3 yards per carry in 2018. And we think of the great year Josh Adams had at 6.94. He would be third in this backfield when you look at the number of carries that they have, Trev. And it just shows you how dynamic this group has been this season. And then you have your quarterback at 5.81 yards per carry, which means he got sacked at least 18 times. Right? I mean, so if you look at the season totals, that Notre Dame quarterbacks got sacked. Actually, that sack number that I put up, I think, was incorrect. No, it's 15. They ranked 20. I think the 22. They ranked 22nd. They gave up 15 sacks this year. At least 10 of those were on Riley Leonard. Right? So you take away 60, 70 yards in sacks or 50, whatever. He's now at over 6 yards a carry if you take away sacks. So when you look at this 3-man punch at running back and quarterback, I mean, you have to stop all 3 of them to stop this team, because you could shut down Jeremiah and shut down Riley, but maybe you may not be able to shut down Jadarian, or you may shut down Jadarian and Riley, but can you shut down Jeremiah? You may shut down the 2 running backs, but can you shut down Riley Leonard also? Do you have to commit so many resources to them that now they're running misdirection, read zones, and all of a sudden Riley Leonard's going out the back door? And you don't have anybody back there because you've committed so much to your rent. That's what makes this so hard, Trevor, is you have to defend 3 guys that every time they touch the ball are a threat to go 50-plus yards and score. I mean, Riley's got a lot. He had 14 touches. A lot of those are short yardage, but he's got his own fair share of big runs this season. And, that's what I think makes this team so difficult to know. By the way, Aeneas Williams averages 6.7 yards per carry, and Keidron Young averages 5.5 yards per carry behind the second-team offensive line. I don't know that I've ever seen anything like this as a Notre Dame fan.
No, I mean, their numbers are crazy. You go and you think about that situation that you just laid out of, you might be able to stop 4 and 24. Can you stop 13? You might be able to stop 13 and 24. Can you stop 4? And, whatever different combination you looked at. I looked directly to the Oregon-Penn State game. Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton both went over for 100 yards. Imagine if Drew Aller had Riley Leonard's mobile ability, what that would have looked like, what it could have looked like. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I mean, and Drew Aller still had 5 carries for 54 yards and a touchdown. So it's not like he did nothing. But you go and you look at Jeremiah Love, and the thing that always stood out to me was the amount of touchdowns he had off of the number of carries that he had. And while you were rattling off those numbers, I did a little bit of quick math myself. Jeremiah Love scores a touchdown 11% of the time that he touches the football. So literally that means if he touches the ball 10 times, he's going to score a touchdown. That's what that is insane. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think enough people understand how crazy of a number that is.
It doesn't change when you include his passing. Did you include his passing statistics?
That's just rushing.
So he has 2 receiving touchdowns on 22 catches. It's literally right at your. It's right at your statistic. I mean,
that's
impressive.
You think of a guy that if he gets 10, 11 offensive touchdowns, he will score a touchdown in some capacity, and that is a lethal thing to have when you're going into the playoffs and looking to make a run.
Well, he scored a touchdown in a game. He had 6 carries. He scored a touchdown in a game. He had 9 carries. He scored a touchdown in a game. He had 7 carries. 2 touchdowns in a game. He had 7 carries. He's been a dynamic back. But the thing that's been impressive about this group is they're not just home run hitters.
Right.
And I think the first half of the USC game really showed that about Jeremiah. He didn't have giant holes to run. They were good holes, right? Like the offensive line did a great job, but USC was committing so many resources to stop the run that he was getting through the first hole and they were getting to him and he was just running them over. And then you wonder, why do these guys keep getting leaped over? Because Jeremiah has shown if you take him on head on, he's going to run you over. Jadarian and Jeremiah can make you miss. But what I love about Jeremiah is if it's you versus him in a hole, he's not going to try to make you miss. He's going to run you over. And then when you get him in space outside, now you've got to worry about him cutting against you, jumping over you, all these other kinds. Because he's got 3 of those highlight reels. People forget he's got 3 of those. Not USC was 1. He had the one against Army, but then he also had one against Northern Illinois. Was it Northern Illinois or Miami?
Yeah, it was Northern
Illinois, right? Where he leaped over a guy in the second level.
Yep.
That's what's made Jeremiah so special the second half of the season. Is he's not just a home run hitter. He's developed patience. He makes good decisions with the football, where last year Jeremiah was just crashing into the hole as hard as he could, and he didn't show a lot of patience. This year he's really developed the mental part of the game, the feel for the game even better. And I also think being the number 1, even though he's not getting a lot of carries, he's only had 1 game all year. He went for over 15 carries or got 15 or more carries. And that was the Virginia game. He had 16. His 16 is his most. He's got 2 with 14, 1 with 12, and then the rest of his carries are 11 or fewer. He's had 3 games where he's been below 10, another game at 10. So, but knowing I'm the number 1 guy, I think he goes into the game with I don't have to go hit a home run on my first play. We saw Jadarian doing that, where it's that number 2 back mindset of, I got to do a lot more with less. And so sometimes maybe you'll make those read mistakes. And remember, Jadarian was doing that a lot early too, where he would hit those home runs, but then he'd have a couple where he kind of run in the back of somebody because he's thinking, I got to hit a home run. And over the course of the season, he's also got a little bit more patient. It's like, hey man, just relax, let it play out. But the wild thing is, Trev, when you look at this ground attack, Notre Dame this season has had 6-7 games of where a player has gone over 100 yards, but it's been 3 different players. So Jeremiah has 4 games of over 100 yards. He went over 100 yards against Purdue. He went over 100 yards against Navy, over 100 against Virginia, and over 100 against Army. Jadarian went over for 100 yards against USC. He also has another game with 95, another game with 86. And then Riley Leonard has 200-yard games. He went over 100 yards and just a half a football against Purdue, and then went for 143 the next week against Miami of Ohio. That goes to show that you can't just stop one of them. You have to figure out a way to stop all 3 of them. And that's where it can get difficult. And then Georgia Tech, I thought, did a pretty good job of slowing down Jeremiah and Jadarian in the run game, or at least Jeremiah anyway. Jadarian had 8 carries. So you look at that Florida State, Georgia Tech game is a perfect example. They put a lot of resources on stopping Jeremiah Love and keeping him from being able to run the football. And then they put a decent amount of emphasis on Riley Leonard. Riley went 10 for 51, 2 touchdowns. It was a good day's performance, solid day's performance. Jeremiah went 14 for 36 and a touchdown, only 2.6 yards per carry. But this is, again, what makes this team so dangerous. Jadarian comes in there, has 8 carries for 69 yards. If you remember, he's the one that sparked the offense with a 20-yard run. And then, oh, by the way, in that game, Jeremiah Love had 3 catches for 57 yards. That's the thing, is it's so hard to stop this team because they can just kind of go off. Florida State's another example. Florida State put a lot of energy into stopping Jeremiah Love. He had 19 yards on 9 carries. Riley Leonard in that same game had 11 carries for 70 yards, 6.4 per carry. And then Jadarian Price had 95 yards on 7 carries. So, yeah, you shut down Jeremiah Love. Congrats. Riley Leonard and Jadarian Price ate you up. That's what makes this team hard to stop, is because you can't just – if Jeremiah has an off day, you're good. If Jadarian has an off day, you're good. They haven't had a day yet where all 3 had an off day. And that's a big part of this, Trev, is what makes it so hard to stop so far. Now they got to continue it in the postseason, but that's been the challenge so far.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the thing that works in their favor is they're 3 different types of runners. Like it would be different if Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love were similar runners. You hit the nail on the head with Jeremiah Love. Once he hits the hole, he's dragging defenders now. I mean, his first run of the game, you saw that against USC. He set the tone early and was like, hey, not one single person is going to bring me down today. But then you go and you talk about Jadarian Price, who might have the best lateral quickness on that team. I mean, it is just
I don't think it's a might.
No, yeah, like his east-west cutting ability is insane. His lateral quickness is insane. But then you go in the traits that they have where they're similar, it's why they're such big playbacks, because their top-end speed is very similar. Those are fast dudes. And then, I've talked about it all season. For whatever reason, couldn't tell you why. Maybe they just underestimate how fast he is. People can just not tackle Riley Leonard. I don't know why. I'm not upset about it. But, right. People can't bring him down. I don't know if it's that one dead leg cut that he has. I don't know if it's – I mean, he is 6'4", close to 220. Yeah, so he is a bigger dude, but – I mean, for whatever reason, people can't bring him down. I just need him to stay on his feet and stop trying to go airborne every chance he gets. It's
so ugly. I don't get it. Yeah,
I
really don't get it. I really don't get it. It is kind of, I'm like, dude, you are not good at that. I don't know why you keep doing that. I really don't understand why you keep doing that.
Right.
The other thing too, Trevor, is when you look at the numbers, I wouldn't say that Notre Dame has played like a gauntlet when it comes to playing great rush defenses. But it hasn't been like when I look at some of Indiana's like rush defense, they have the number 1 rush defense in the country. We'll break this down more next week because it's not meant to necessarily compare the two right now. But when you look at sort of where they rank in the country, they have played. You and I look. They didn't play a single top 50 rushing offense this season. Correct? Isn't that what you found out? Ohio State was the best at 54th?
Ohio State was the best at 59th. They played 7 rushing offenses that ranked outside of the top 100.
Right. So that's not good. I mean, I'm not the smartest guy on the planet, Trev, but I can figure that one out. That's not that good. If you look at Notre Dame, however, and you look at what they faced, no, they haven't faced I don't think a single top 25 or top 10 rush defense all season, and they've played a couple bad ones. Purdue ranks 120th, Florida State ranks 109th. But you look at the rest, Trevor, and I'm counting it up now. Army was 11th.
Yep.
And they went for, was it 2? What was their number that game? They went for
230 something.
273 against Army.
Well,
they faced number 20. So that's 2 top. They faced 49, 47, 42, 39, 30. So they faced 7 teams that finished ranked in the top 50 in rush defense this season. They went for 190, and then here's what they did against those teams: 198 against Texas A&M. Northern Illinois held them to 123. They went for 47. Miami, Ohio's 47th in rushing defense. Notre Dame went for 270 against them. Louisville ranks 42nd. They struggled in that one at 117. We talked about a lot about that one. Stanford ranked 39th in rushing defense this season. Notre Dame went for 229 in that game. Georgia Tech ranks 30th in rush defense. They went for 168 in that game. Navy's 85th. They ripped them up. Florida State's 109th. UVA's 60th. USC's 54th, and they rushed for 258. USC, I believe, was inside the top 50 before the Notre Dame game. And then when Notre Dame went for 258, as we talked about, that's the most that USC has given up on the ground, I believe, all season. No, Michigan went for 290. There's only 2 teams that went over 200 yards against USC. It was Notre Dame and it was Michigan.
Yeah.
And in the 6 games before playing Notre Dame, They gave up 111, 119, 113, 121, 56, 118.
Yeah.
So they were a much better defense than they were early. So it puts context into your where you are is pretty impressive performance because you're doing it against teams that don't necessarily give up that kind of yardage on a regular basis. And I think that puts a little bit of a context into how good the performance was for that Notre Dame team this season. Like Miami of Ohio, 270, it's the most yards they'd given up. The next closest was 232 that Ohio U put up in the championship game. So that was 38 fewer yards. They did it on 46 carries. Notre Dame did it on 36. You know what I mean? So you just look at it, just that kind of thing. It's consistent. Just nobody else does to teams what Notre Dame has done to them for most of the season, especially the second half of the season, Trev.
Yeah, you go through and you look at some of Notre Dame's previous opponents and where they ranked going into the Notre Dame game, right? USC had the 43rd best rush defense. I look at Louisville, they had the 18th best rush defense. You look at Stanford, they had the 12th best rush defense in college football at the times that they played. Now, mind you, some of those opponents were earlier in the year, but I think it just goes to show that not only did Notre Dame perform above what they were, Notre Dame had more rushing yards in their game than what they allowed all season. Going into it, Stanford allowed 88.2 rushing yards per game before Notre Dame played them. You know what I mean? You start to look at some of those stats. I mean, Army going into their game, they had the number 3 rush defense in the country before Notre Dame played them. So that all kind of provides a little bit of context to what this rushing attack was really able to do to some of these opponents, because part of the factor of their average is what happened when they played Notre Dame, right? So
I want to give you some context. So here's what Army did in the 4 games before Notre Dame. 61 yards allowed, 2.5 per carry. 87 yards allowed, 4.4 per carry. 117 yards allowed, 2.9 per carry. 69 yards allowed, 3.8 yards per carry. Notre Dame comes, 273 yards, fought 9.4 per carry. Next 2 games against UTSA, 117 yards, 4.5 per carry. AAC championship game against Tulane, 29 yards, 115 per carry. So listen, one of these things is not like the other, right? I mean, that Army was the one team, and again, I've said this before. And by the way, Tulane going into that game was averaging over 200 yards a game rushing going into that game. So they completely shut that Tulane run game down. They'd gone over 300 yards multiple times that season, and they shut that game down, that team down on the ground. It just kind of goes to show, if you look at Army's statistics, you're like, one of these things does not look like the others. And again, it came down to that. So when you look at it, the context, you talk about building blocks for a championship, it's can you do it consistently? And that's the thing about this group, that they can do it consistently. They're doing it week after week after week after week. When 168 is your down point against the number 30 team in the country, you're going to have the results that you're going to have. And that was on the road. That was away from home. And so there is no bigger building block for a championship than this ability, because it's not just about scheme. It's not just because you have a great line. It's not because you have great backs. It's all of it. This is one of the better receiving groups in the country at downfield blocking.
Yeah.
The receivers have had a lot of struggles this year. Bo Collins has been brutal the last 5-6 games when it comes to catching the football. I hope that he would even tell you that. But you know what has not taken a back seat for Bo Collins during this stretch of tough? He's still run blocking his butt off. Jaden Thomas blocks his butt off. Jaden Greathouse has gotten a lot better as a run blocker. Jordan Faison competes his butt off as a run blocker. I mean, so there still is at least that. I think the tight ends have gotten way better run blocking. First half of the year, Trevor, that was a major problem.
Yep.
The run blocking, they had one good game. I think it was against Purdue. And then outside of that, the run blocking was mediocre at best the first 6 games of the year. They're blocking at a much higher level now. Mitchell Evans is blocking. Mitchell Evans the last few games probably has blocked as well as he has in 8-point time as Chris. He's never been a great run blocker.
Yep.
But he's blocking better. There's been a buy-in with, hey, when we give these 2 cats the football, or when Riley takes off, you are the difference between the 30-yard gain and the 70-yard gain. I think of the 70-yard touchdown that Jadarian Price had. And I was watching it on the Here Come the Irish episode, by the way, which was great. It is where it was Tony was the guy that does the radio, him and Ryan Harris. They were doing that play. Did you watch it? And he's like, oh, they're just going to probably run the clock out here. And then it's like Jadarian Price makes a move. Oh, he's in space. But Cooper Flanagan's blocking downfield. The receivers are blocking downfield. So when you talk about having a great rushing attack, it can't just be because you have great backs. Notre Dame had a great offensive line in 2017, but Georgia was still able to shut their run game down. Why? Because they couldn't complement it with anything else. Your backs weren't hitting holes well. They were slow to the hole. They weren't finding open cuts. There was a run in that game, for example, where Mike McGlinchey's pulling to the right, and if Josh Adams just follows him, he might go. But he got impatient, slammed it up into the B gap, and got stuffed for like a 2-yard gain. This backfield waits for that to happen and then hits it. And then there's blocking downfield. And then, of course, you have the quarterback threat. And, that's kind of where I'm at, is when you talk about the run game, and I see the comments about – we're talking about the run game right now, okay? Yes, we would like to see the receiving corps be better catching the football. But when you talk about the ability to building blocks for championships, that is something they have. They have a real, legitimate, big-time run game, run talent, and run operation going into the postseason. And as you said, Trev, look at the teams that are winning in this conference championship games. By and large, most of those teams that won were teams that ran the football better. That's it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I had a coach in high school. He was my favorite coach that I'd ever had at any level, and he always used to tell the wide receiver room, "You guys are owners of the big play. Wide receivers own the big play." And when you're a young guy and you're going in there, you think, well, yeah, I mean, I could go 65 yards and burn a corner. No, downfield blocking. Wide receivers own the big play, and Notre Dame's wide receiving corps takes that to heart. Very similar to what you said about Riley Leonard. Look, if you're not going to be throwing the ball a lot, you better not be turning it over. And it's kind of the same thing with the wide receivers, man. Look, if you're not going to be hauling in 11 catches a game and going over 100 yards and catching 2 touchdowns, you better be blocking your butt off down the field, and they are. I'm with you there.
When you look at the building blocks for a championship, Trev, I think there's elite talent, skill talent at Notre Dame in the backfield. The offensive line, run blocking wise, is a no question about it. They're playing right now. They're playing at a championship level right now. They got to continue that, obviously. But the other part of it is, what's the biggest stumbling block? And this is what makes the Notre Dame offense such a difficult group to evaluate, because you don't know what you're going to get from the pass game from week to week. What's the building block for a championship? The ground attack. What's the potential stumbling block for a championship? Big picture. And the next, we'll talk about areas where they got to thrive and get better. Those will be more specific aspects. This is more big picture. But when you think about it, the biggest potential stumbling block is the pass game. And they don't need the pass game, Trev, in my opinion, for 4 games to go out there and be a lights out, rip you up type of pass game. If they needed that, this team's not going to win a championship. If it comes down to where if you can't throw the ball for 200 yards a game the next 4 games, you're not going to win a championship, Notre Dame's not going to win a championship. They don't have the pass pro ability. They don't have the receivers right now that have proven anything this season. They don't have the quarterback that's proven he can do that with any kind of consistency. There's been 2 games where Riley was on pace for about 300 yards if they would have let him keep throwing. But that was against teams that aren't very good defending the pass. This team has season high of 252 yards passing. It has certainly gotten better in the second half of the season. And I'll have some stats for that here in a second. It's certainly gotten better since the bye. But the reality is this is the group that is going to have to really this is the big question mark. What's the potential stumbling block? It's this right here. Can the quarterback it's all, again, we just talked about the run game. All phases of the offense play a big role in this team being a big-time running team. All phases play into why the passing game is a question mark. Can it be the best version of itself over these next 4 games? Because the best version of itself is enough for this team to go beat anybody they play.
Yes.
Is the median good enough? That I don't know. That's the question mark. And that's the potential stumbling block. But it's all phases. Is the quarterback going to read the defense well and get the ball where it needs to go to? Are the receivers going to catch the ball? I mean, that's kind of a big deal, right? It's kind of a big part of it. Is the O-line going to give them protection, especially against some of the teams that do a better job of rushing the quarterback? Those are the big questions that you look at and say, if they don't make it and the offense is a reason why, what do you think it'll be? It'll be because the pass game doesn't do enough to complement the run game, and that allows teams to slow the run game down without risk of being hurt by the pass game. If Notre Dame doesn't make a run, I think we're going to be able to look back to this aspect of the team and say that's probably going to be the reason why. If they go on a run where they win 4 games, then this part of the offense probably played better when it counted most. That's where I'm at with it.
There's going to come a point in the playoffs where, and I don't know if it's going to be for a whole game. It could be for a whole game. It could be for 2 games. It could be for a quarter. It could be for half a quarter. But there's going to be a time in the playoffs where the Notre Dame passing attack in all phases is going to have to play the best that they had played all season relative to what their ceiling is. I'm really glad that you brought that up because it's unrealistic. Look, guys, they're not going to go out and be 2019 LSU, right? They don't have Joe Burrow. They don't have Jamar Chase. They don't have Justin Jefferson. They don't have Terrace Marshall. You know what I mean? So they need to go be the best versions of themselves and what they're capable of doing. And there are a lot of question marks. I was feeling really, really good about where Riley Leonard was at as a passer because at the end of the day, they just need Riley Leonard to kind of go out and be similar to like a JJ McCarthy-esque. Like the reason why Michigan, one of the big reasons why is because McCarthy played a clean playoffs, right? And he just went out and was just kind of an athletic game manager. But you go back and you look at what he did against Alabama, there were moments in that game where they needed JJ to, hey, our run game got us here. Our defense got us here. We need you this play. We need you this drive. And that's going to come up. And I was feeling really good where Riley was at. There was no blatant oh my God, what is that moments? And then the interception happened against USC. However, he bounced back the next play and threw one of his best balls of the season to Mitchell Evans for a touchdown. So, it kind of cushions that blow a little bit. And you go and you look at the wide receivers. Now, I'm sure everybody knows the stats by now, but Notre Dame has yet to have any pass catcher go over 100 yards. The closest was Bo Collins against Stanford with 85. The most receptions by a Notre Dame pass catcher this year has been 5 in one game. And it's tied right now between Jeremiah Love, Bo Collins, Mitchell Evans, and Jaden Greathouse. So they need to have – and look, it's unrealistic to ask any of those guys to go from having 5 catches and 60 yards and 5 catches and 80 yards a game to 11 catches and 165 and 2 touchdowns. That's not my expectation, nor should it be theirs. But they need that group to step up, man. And then obviously the final and arguably the most important phase is going to be pass protection. You talk about the run game kind of being like a little step ladder looking thing throughout the season, is progressively getting better. I mean, the Notre Dame's pass pro has been very much looking, if I were to graph it out, kind of looks like a mountain range. It's had its peaks, it's had its valleys, and so it's all of those phases have to come together, similar to what we were talking about in the run game. And I think you said it perfectly. If Notre Dame makes a run and goes to the national championship, obviously the defense is going to play and defense is going to do what they're going to do. The run game did what they were going to do, but there's going to be moments that you go back and look throughout the playoffs and throughout the postseason where you're going to say passing game stepped up there. That's what they needed. I agree. That's where I'm at.
So when I look at this pass game, Trevor, and you look at it's not, like you said, it's not going to be a dynamic group where they're going to go out and throw for 300 yards a game. It's just not where they're going to be. It's just not going to be where they're going to be. What I'm saying is when you look at this pass attack, it has certainly gotten better. And the first 5 games, Notre Dame completed 64 points. This is as a team, not Riley Leonard, just as a team. I'll kind of crack the Riley Leonard numbers here in a second, but I just kind of wanted to go with the overall team numbers here, Trev. Is the first 5 games of the year, Notre Dame completed 64.3% of their passes. They averaged 171.6 passing yards per game. They averaged 6.1 yards per pass attempt. They averaged 9.5 yards per pass completion during the first 5 games of the year. When you look at the final 7, so coming out of the bye week, they have averaged 214 passing yards per game. That's not going to set the world on fire. by any stretch of the imagination, Trevor. Right now, keep in mind there's a lot of those games where they weren't really throwing the ball a whole lot in the second half, but that's still 42.4 yards per game better than the first 5 games. They've upped their completion percentage by almost 3 points, 64.3 to 67.2. The yards per pass attempt has jumped up from 6.1 to 8.1 the last 7 games, and their yards per completion has jumped up from 9.5 to 12.0 in the last 7 games. So if you look at that and say, hey, that's obviously a group that's got to get a lot better. Those are not like, oh man, if you average 12 yards of a completion in the postseason, boy, this team is going to beat everybody they play. No, that's not what I'm saying, because 12 yards per completion is still, if you look at it from an offensive standpoint, it's 12.0 would still rank them in the top. I don't know. Let me point this. Let me print this out. I'm going to pull it up. It's not in the top 35 for sure. It's going to be, let me see here, yards per catch. Let's see here. Let's go yards per completion, and we will go there. I swear sometimes these Google Sheets do not want to be friends with me, Trevor, and I don't know what I ever did to them to make them feel that way. Notre Dame would rank at 12.0, would rank right now. They rank 114th or in yards per completion, something like that. Right now at 12.0, if that was their entire season total, that would tie them for 64th. So it's not like wow, they've lit the world on fire in the last however long, but it's still a big improvement. Now the thing is, if you look at those numbers, however, the yards per attempt would rank better than the yards per completion as far as a national average. So their yards per attempt during that stretch, so they've completed 125 passes for 186 attempts. That's it would be 1,498 yards divided by 186 attempts. That's 8.05. That would actually rank them 30th in the country. So it's what it is they've become a lot more efficient throwing the football.
Yep.
RPO game's better. The quick game is better. The running backs are getting more involved. They're just not an explosive pass attack. My point is, if they play like they have at their best moments in the second half of the year, that's all they need to do. They don't have to look like, oh my gosh, is this Riley Leonard or Jimmy Clausen? I can't tell. It doesn't have to be that. It just needs to be, kind of what he was in the second and third quarter against Stanford. It just needs to kind of be, what he was when you look at, the Navy game and the way he threw the ball in the Navy game. I thought he was very good. He threw for 178 yards and 2 touchdowns. He didn't I don't think he threw but one pass in the second half of that game. A couple passes in the second half of that game. I think he only played one series in the second half of that game. First half, he lit them up. You look at how he played in the second and third quarter against Georgia Tech after the interception. The Stanford game, he had 10.4 yards per attempt. Army, he was very good. He averaged 11.4 yards per attempt that game. And honestly, the USC game, outside of the pick, was not a bad performance throwing the football. 7.0 yards per attempt, but he was a 77.3 yards per completion percentage. That was efficient. You just got to hit a couple more of those downfield plays, and he was look, his numbers look so much different if he doesn't get drilled on that play where he's trying to hit Jaden Harrison over the middle, wide open, right? And so that's the big part of it is Riley has to be a good decision maker, and his decision making has been very spotty. Even the second half of the year, there's some games where he is feeling it, he's reading the defense, he is going where it needs to go, and then there's games like I felt like against Virginia, at times against Florida State, where he actually did decent yardage wise. Where it's like, dude, he's missing some opportunities for big-time plays here. USC, I thought he read the defense better. Just wasn't always the time to get the ball out. So he's going to have to be more on top of his game as far as getting the ball where it needs to go and protecting the football. And then, of course, the offensive line is going to have to protect him. That's good. To me, that's the biggest key. And then the second biggest key is, can the receivers catch the ball? That's kind of where it's at. They got to catch the ball. That's my big, Bo Collins, look, man, we got to roll with you. You got to catch the ball better than you have the last month of the season. They got to get Bo Collins. We'll talk about all those things, but that's the potential stumbling block, Trev, when you look at this football team in the second half in the postseason. If they don't go on a deep run, we're going to look at this group, and the numbers are going to look a lot more in the game they lose, like we saw the first 5 games, not the last 7 games.
Yeah, I agree. I look, the Riley Leonard throw that keeps me up at night, and I'm so upset that it didn't count, was that 35-yard post route that he ripped to Jaden Harrison against Virginia. I mean, that was a pretty throw, and I think it would have. I think the throw would have turned a lot of heads if that play would have counted. I mean, he still did it, but it's just, it's kind of been a season like that where it's been something good, but a read was missed. The guy was open, but he couldn't get the ball off or something. I'm with you. It's got to be complete. Got to be complete.
So, Trev, here in a minute, we're going to go on to just sort of the areas, get into some of the nitty-gritty of how they continue thriving in certain areas and how they improve in certain areas. More specifically, we kind of looked at it from a macro level. Next, we're going to get into it a little bit more on a micro level. But before we do, folks, y'all know what to do. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your family and friends. And, of course, as always, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Trev, this last couple sections, we're going to get into the areas where Notre Dame has to thrive in the postseason. The first one we can kind of work through quickly. To win a championship, what you do best has to be still pretty good. You have to be able to do it. There's going to be games in the postseason where you're going to play a team that is going to, maybe have some matchups, but even then you have to find ways to where you're still at least good in that area. Like if you're playing Georgia and Georgia's like, we are going to shut down your run game, we're not going to let you run the ball, and Notre Dame only rushes for 150 yards, that's a win. Because to keep them to 150, most likely what's going to happen is they're going to have to commit a lot of resources, and you've got to do some other things. But that is enough for the run game to kind of get that going. And if you go for more, then obviously you're going to rip that team up, right? And so the biggest thing is when you're talking about what you have to do to thrive to win a champion. We're talking about to win a championship. This is where what they have to do. Number one is what you do best has to keep rolling. That's going to be super important in these next 4 games, and it begins with Indiana, the number 1 rush defense in the country. If you can run on them, it's going to set up a foundation for you to really build on this thing over this next month of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's when you go through and you look at what a team does best. Again, I'm going to continue to reference the conference championship because I think across the board that's going to be the closest look and the closest reference point that we can have to the playoffs. So the playoffs happen, and you go through and look at every team and what every team does well. All of the conference championship winners went back and either did or continued to do what they did well. Simply put, your dudes have to go be dudes. It's that time, and you can use whatever cliche saying you would. That's why you come to Notre Dame. That's why you play at this level. But in all seriousness, your guys have to go out and be the guys that they had been all season. Big time guys that showed up in the best moments. And, that's where, people start talking about playoff MVPs and things like that. It's when guys go out and be the guys that they were for 12, 13 games prior to the postseason. So couldn't agree more. Could not agree more.
Well, and that kind of gets into it right there, Trevor, is in order to play at your best in the postseason, your playmakers got to make plays. You said it, right? And it's not just Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Riley Leonard. It's Mitchell Evans. Mm-hmm. It's Jaden Greathouse. Mm-hmm. Those 2 guys, to me especially, need to be that dude in the postseason, right? And so that's not about them improving. It's about them be your best.
Right.
Like you look at a guy like Bo Collins and you think about the season he's had and some of the frustrations and disappointments we've seen early in the year. But I'll say this, for all the frustrations you have with Bo, if he gets back to playing like he did against Texas A&M and Miami of Ohio and Stanford minus the fumble, right? Okay, now you've got yourself a ball player there. And so, I'm not asking Chris Mitchell to do something he hasn't done or whatever, but look, there's guys we know that we have seen be playmakers. Jordan Faison's another one, right? We've seen Jordan Faison be that playmaker. We've seen Jaden Greathouse be that playmaker. We've seen Mitchell Evans be that playmaker. Those guys plus Love, plus Price, plus Riley Leonard, you've got to be dudes. Your playmakers have to make plays. And that's going to be a big key for what we're doing. And just real quick, some of you are throwing in super chats about Notre Dame, Indiana, and all that kind of stuff. We'll answer those today, but you're going to be better off holding those until next week when we actually dive into specific matchup, just to give you a heads up there, Michael. But we will answer those. But that's the thing is, Trevor, you nailed it. You said your dudes got to be dudes. The thing we have here is playmakers got to make plays. And not guys that, Chris Mitchell's got to be the FIU version of Chris Mitchell. We'll get into that down the road. We're talking about the guys that this season have proven themselves to be playmakers when they're on their game. It's Riley Leonard. It's Jeremiah Love. It's Jadarian Price. It's Mitchell Evans. It's Jaden Greathouse. It's Jordan Faison, especially. Those 6 right there, to me, have to be good in the postseason, in the passing game and run game, if this team is going to make the run that we need it to make. Yes, it'd be nice to get the better version of Bo Collins, but Bo Collins at his best has always been a good, steady possession type of receiver, right? You could even throw Jaden Harrison in there, honestly, Trev, if you want to bring him up too, because he's had some moments where he's made some big-time plays too. He had a big-time catch against Louisville to win that game. If you remember correctly, he had a couple big plays against Florida State. Should have had a 70-yard touchdown or an 80-yard touchdown against Florida State, and honestly would have had probably a 60-yard touchdown against USC, at least. I forget where that ball was, where he had worked himself open over the middle of the field, and then Riley got hit as he was about to throw it, and it kind of floats in the air. There wasn't a dude on screen from Jaden Harrison. He's another one. He's a playmaker. Bo Collins is a good possession receiver. He's got to play better. I'm talking about your big play guys, and that's that group right there. And the thing that gives me some encouragement about the postseason, Trevor, is none of those guys have to play out of their minds. If we get the best version of what we've seen from Mitchell Evans, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, and Jaden Harrison this season, not what they did in the past, what they could do, what we saw them do in the spring, or if we just get the best version of what they've done this season in the postseason, then this team is going to be really hard to beat in the postseason. Yeah. So that's the key. It's not when you start getting like, okay, if this guy can play better than he has all season in the postseason, you're going to win a championship. We will have a fun conversation about that tomorrow, but that's not a real analysis. That'd be cool. But like the real analysis is like you said, Trev, your dudes have to be dudes. In every game, 2 of Evans, Faison, Greathouse, and Harrison need to be balling. Don't need all 4 of them, because if all 4 of them are balling, this team will literally go 4-0 and may not play a close game. I mean, if they're all 4 going off, you know what I mean? You just need each game, just need 2 of them in each game. And if you can do that, then they'll take the pressure off of the backs. And if you do anything, if you can complement the run game these next 4 weeks, your run game's going to be fine. You're gonna roll people. That's a scary thing about this offense, Trev. They're 39 points a game. They're a top 15 scoring offense, even if you take out the 6 defensive touchdowns. And we've yet to see this group play an A game or even a B+ game on offense. Went from an execution standpoint. They've played A games from we're way better than you. Purdue was an A game because our dudes are way better than your dudes. You're not going to bust a 70-yard touchdown run when you're trying to run the clock out in the second quarter against Georgia and Indiana. You know what I mean? Like, you're just not going to do that. That's not real. That doesn't translate to the better teams. So you're going to need that part of it to get going. And so to me, when you talk about this, it's the playmakers got to step up and make plays. And then, of course, your red zone offense needs to keep being what it was, if not even better. You can't afford – like Mike Denbrock and Marcus Freeman need to have a conversation here before the playoffs saying, hey, listen, we're going to, within reason, we're going to be a heavy going for it on 4th down or taking some shots on 4th down in the red zone because we want to put touchdowns on the board and not going to put this game in Mitch Jeter's hands or Zach Yoakum's hands or Eric Goyen's hands. We're going to ask Riley Leonard and Jeremiah Love and Mitchell Evans and Eli Raridan and Jaden Greathouse and those guys to be our playmakers. So maybe that impacts your 3rd down play calls to get, that's going to be a conversation. But when you get in the red zone, you need to be that top 10 red zone touchdown team that you've been all year. Those things are going to have to be what you build your offense around in the postseason.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to the point when we talk about dudes being dudes, it's fun to speculate and talk about, who could be the player of the game. We do that every Thursday. Who's your offensive breakout performance against Stanford? And, to your point, like, it'd be fun to bring up a Chris Mitchell. I know he's hurt, but, like KK Smith has been thrown around before in the past. Once you get to the postseason, proven production over potential. That's the way that I look at it, because you've now played 12 games and you have to, like what Mike Denbrock did, kind of look at this team and where they're at and say, okay, how can we maximize where they're at? Man, if you give me the Louisville version of Jaden Greathouse, if you give me the Navy version of Jordan Faison and the USC version of Mitchell Evans and the Texas A&M version of Bo Collins, I like where this team is at, because then you can look back and say, just give me the 2024 regular season version of Jeremiah Love. Mm-hmm. Give me the 2024 regular season version of Jadarian Price. If you have that to build up, that's your foundation. Mm-hmm. That's how I look at it. When you're building a championship caliber team, you have to start somewhere. For Notre Dame, it's the run game. Right. If they're able to get those players that I just talked about, getting to play consistently for 4 games, how they kind of sporadically each did all year, Notre Dame's going to be a really hard team to beat, man. Yeah, really hard team.
It's like Jay Lamont in the chat says that need some yak from the receivers. That's exactly what we're talking about. Like that, the guys we just listed as the playmakers are what? Even Mitchell Evans has been a pretty good yards after the catch guy. Not as much this year as last year, but he's been a guy that's been a really good yards after the catch guy. That's what Jaden Harrison is. That's what Jordan Faison is. That's what Jaden Greathouse is. That's what Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price are. That's what Riley Leonard is. And so Jay, that's the whole point. I mean, that's what, because not every big 40-yard pass play is going to be a 40-yard bomb. Sometimes it's a slant route that you make someone miss and you go for 40. It's getting a check down. And that's like Georgia Tech. You throw a little check down. USC throw a little check down to Jeremiah Love and he makes 3 dudes miss. Next thing you know, it's a 20-yard gain. You need that type of playmaking ability in the postseason if you're going to win a championship.
Yes.
It has to happen. Yes. It has to happen. So there's some areas, Trev, too, where they have to improve, and they're going to have to be better in the postseason than they've been. Don't have to be great at it. You have to improve. And the first one starts with pass protection.
Pass pro, like I said before, peaks and valleys. And unfortunately, if I'm just evaluating this offensive line as a whole, there's been significantly more valleys. Now, like I said before, with some of the receivers and some of the other skilled positions, you kind of have a good evaluation of where this team is at in 12 weeks or through 12 games, because it's unrealistic to think that, like they're going to be here in the first 12 games throughout the regular season, and then they're just going to come in over the top and be here in the postseason. Right? Like that's not a realistic expectation. And you can kind of go through and you can pinpoint all 5 players along the offensive line and what they need to do and how they need to perform. Run blocking, not really going to touch it. Keep doing what you're doing. But from a pass protection standpoint, you have to find ways, if you're a player, to hold your own. Like, we talk about dudes being dudes. You're starting offensive lineman at the University of Notre Dame. You are expected to hold your own in pass pro. But what also comes with improvement in pass pro is Riley being able to check to the proper protection at the line of scrimmage if he sees a blitz coming. Running backs being able to step up in pass protection. Tight ends being able to step up in pass protection. Because as easy as it is to highlight the offensive line, which it obviously is mostly on the offensive line when we're talking about pass protection, but it's the pass protection unit as a whole. And that has to be better than it's been all season. Not saying I'm asking for them to play at an unrealistic standard of where it's at, right? But it's kind of the same thing we talked about with the skilled guys. Kind of take your best performance, take the highlight reels of pass pro in the season, and you have to find a way to build that all together for 4 games. Because we can talk about Riley Leonard hitting his reads and being on and being a rhythm. We can talk about wide receivers not dropping catches, and we can talk about the tight ends getting going and the running backs out of the backfield. None of that happens if Riley Leonard's getting hit in the backfield in quick game before he has a chance to get the ball off. So, Brian, I'm with you. I mean, pass pro has to be top of mind in areas where the offense can improve, because without it, all of this talk about the skilled positions and Riley Leonard being on is going to be all for naught.
The other part of it is, we talked earlier about Riley Leonard's got to be a better decision maker. And what I mean by that is there are times this year where Riley is just, from a decision maker, he's clicking. He's going back to his 3rd read within rhythm, banging those backside digs and backside in cuts, and he feels good. Then there's times where he's rushing his reads pre-snap, and a guy's coming open on a 5-yard out cut, and he won't throw it because he's thinking, I need to throw it down, if I need to throw it downfield. take the 5-yard out cut on 1st and 10, right? Because then if they start creeping up on that, then you can get some shots down the field. He's got to be a good decision maker. That's an area that I don't call that improvement. Just you need to be at your best when what we've seen. But the one area that I think does need to improve for this team to go for a championship, because I don't believe you can just replicate exactly what you've done over your last 7 opponents, because every team you're going to play from here on out is probably going to be better than the teams you've played over the last 7. Louisville, when they played them, was a really good football team at the time. Obviously, Army, but it's a different animal. Army's a different animal than the teams you're going to play. You've got to be able to do some things where you are improving upon what you've done. And one area where Notre Dame's going to have to be more effective is their vertical passing game. Now, I'm not saying they got to throw the ball 50 bombs a game, but they've got to be able to hit some deep stuff over the middle. They've got to be able to take some shots outside. That the play that Riley threw the pick against USC, I think if he just drops back and launches that sucker, it might be a touchdown. You've got to be willing to take those shots. Pass pro's a big part of that. But it's also about Riley being a better decision maker and saying, hey, I'm going to take this shot. You think about the ball he forced against Georgia Tech. He was taking a shot, but he predetermined in his head, I'm going to take this shot. That's not what I'm talking about, throwing a post up. But you get that, they're going cover 1. Their second safety's down. He's in the alley. There's no way they can get out to just a straight 3-step, let that go ball to the field side happen. He's got to be good there. They've got to be able to hit some deeper stuff. They've got to hit some corner routes like he hit against USC. It's a great ball. They actually ran a smash concept. They ran a pivot route with number 1 outside. They ran a corner over top, which I love that concept, Trev, when you're getting aggressive corner play, because the pivot route will occupy the corner a lot more than just a straight hitch, because the straight hitch you can kind of play in the red. Like it was right outside the red zone. When you try to run smash near the red zone, it's a lot easier for them to undercut that corner route because the safety, doesn't have as much room to rest to be deep. So they ran that pivot route, forced that corner to step down, and now that outside go ball or that outside corner route is now open, and Riley threw a great ball. Mitchell made a great catch. That's an example of it. The slot fades have to be accurate, on time. Don't force them. Get the ball downfield. Get it over that outside shoulder. Let your guys go make plays. Don't underthrow it. They're going to have to hit some downfield shots. I'm not talking about 60-yard over-the-top bomb post routes. That's not really Riley's game. The slot fades, the outside go balls, the corner routes, the backside digs that get guys, 15, 20-yard gains. You're going to have some of those at least a couple games. At least a couple games.
Well, and another thing, too, is it's just their willingness to do it. How many times have you and I been watching a game together and we're texting back and forth of this defense is daring Notre Dame to take a shot, and they just won't. Now, part of that is because you have 2 running backs who can rip off a big play at any time, but chunk plays are going to be huge in the playoffs, and you can't just rely that 4-24 are going to put on the Superman and Batman cape and go to town on whatever defense that they're going up against, right? So to me, not only, yes, converting on those vertical pass shots down the field, but just even having the willingness to say, hey, look, kind of like a check, kind of like a warning shot of hey, listen, if you keep creeping up, if you keep loading the box, we are going to take these shots because eventually one of them is going to hit, right? Now, ideally, it's more efficient than 1 for 5 or whatever. But my addition to what you're saying of being able to hit those plays is just have the willingness to do it, right? So for Riley, sometimes you just have to pull the trigger on one. You have to go up and trust your guy. I think of, that back shoulder that he threw to Bo Collins on that final offensive drive against Texas A&M for that go-ahead touchdown. It was just as simple as, I think my guy's better than your guy. I trust my guy one-on-one. And so being able to take those shots and the willingness to do it, converting on them is going to be massive in the postseason. Can't put enough emphasis on that.
Definitely an area of improvement. And then the final one is they have got to get better on 3rd down. Notre Dame ranking 87th in the country on 3rd down is unacceptable. And there's been a lot of reasons for it. At times it's been pass pro. At times it's been the quarterback not making good decisions. At times it's been drops. At times it's also what you have to think about this Notre Dame football team too, Trevor, is in order to properly understand their 3rd down offense, you have to also understand that Marcus Freeman's been much more willing to take shots on or to go for it on 4th down this season. Notre Dame this year has they rank 45th in the country in 4th down attempts. But if you think about how, honestly, many times they haven't been in a lot of where they needed it. They're 5th in the country in fourth down conversion rate. They're 19 of 25 in fourth down conversions. This is a team that is far, far more willing to go for it on fourth down, and they're really good at getting it on fourth down. The last time Notre Dame attempted this many fourth downs in a season was 2019. And that's, to be honest with you, a lot of times because they kind of had to. But they haven't they were 17 of 25 in 2019. They were 16 of 25 in 2018. This is not a team that's been a huge, heavy fourth down team. Marcus Freeman goes for it a lot more on fourth down. And the interesting thing is they've been way better at it down the stretch. They began the season through again, we talked about that how instrumental that bye week was. Notre Dame was 4 of 7 on third down through the first 5 games. 4 of 7. That's a 57.1% completion mark. Since that time, they are 15 of 18 on fourth down. They were a perfect 3 for 3 against Stanford, a perfect 1 for 1 against Navy, a perfect 2 for 2 against Florida State, and a perfect 3 for 3 against USC. They went 3 of 4 against Virginia. They went 3 of 4 against Virginia Tech. Like, they have been a knockout team. Now, with that in mind, that means sometimes on 3rd and 9, you're okay getting 6. And so that factors into why your third down offense is where it is, but it doesn't make you go from 20th to 87th. Which is where they are, right? Like, so if they were maybe more of a let's take more chances on third down, maybe they would be 68th on third down. Still not good enough, right? So you have to at least be honest about not all the third down, quote unquote, failures were necessarily failures. Sometimes you take that, it's 3rd and 12, you gain 7. Okay, we're going for it on 4th and 5. You gain 3, we're punting. So some of those are like that. You have to take that into consideration. But 87th is still way below, even if you take into that context where if you take out every third down, so let's just say Notre Dame went for it on fourth down 25 times. So let's take away, Trev, 25 of Notre Dame's third down attempts. And let's say they would have been trying to think of how, let's say they would have been a perfect, like they would have gone 50% on third down in those opportunities, right? So you have 128 third downs. Let's say that they would have got, 13 of those. So that would have given them 62 for 128. Okay, if they were perfect on all those attempts, or over 50% of those attempts, that would jump them up quite a bit, right? But the reality is they were a 38% team on third down. So if you take away, this is kind of my point. If you look at it and say, hey, we're going to take away certain numbers of this or that, it's still not a great third down offense. It's got to be better. It's got to be better on third down. You've got to be really good on third down when you need to convert. You need to be really good on third down when you just need to get a big chunk of yards to put you in a good position on fourth down. Because I don't know that you want to live on going for it on fourth down in your own territory all the time when you're playing Georgia and Penn State or Oregon or Texas or Ohio State or even Indiana. And so third down offense is going to have to get a lot better. That requires, again, better pass pro. Receivers got to get open. Riley Leonard's got to make the throws, and you got to catch it. Because we've had, 4 or 5 that I can think of off the top of my head, third downs that have been negated by drops this season. So all of it, the whole operation is going to have to get better on third down.
And outside of just the operation on third down, it all has to be better. You got to win on early downs. Like if anybody, some of the things that are very indicative of Notre Dame's third down conversion percentage is, I go back to them being a very rhythm-based offense. When they're in rhythm, they just don't face a lot of third downs. Let's be real about that. Like on first down, they're ripping off 7-yard gains. They get a 5-yard gain on second down. Then they get an 11-yard gain on the next first down. Notre Dame is dead last in the country in third downs attempted. You know what I mean? And the second to last team is Indiana, which is, I know, something that we'll get into next week as well, but makes it all more for a fun matchup. But my point being is, in order to increase your percentage of converting third downs, put yourself into third and manageable, because Notre Dame isn't converting 38% of their third downs because they just can't figure out how to get 3rd and 3.
Right.
You need to win on early downs. And part of that is, to Brian's point, the pass protection. Stop dropping passes. Stop putting yourself in 2nd and 10. Another part of that is what I touched on earlier. Stop committing drive-killing penalties on early downs. I can't tell you how many times Notre Dame picks up a 6-yard gain, a 12-yard run, and then we see the yellow flag come out and there's hands to the face, or there's holding, or there's even a false start on first down. You first and 15 looks a heck of a lot different. You can pick up a 6-yard gain on first down. If you're on first and 15, you're still second and long. So you have to find a way to win on early downs to put yourself in favorable matchups. Now, I'm not saying that means if Notre Dame is in 3rd and 3 every time, they're going to go 100% in the postseason. Like that's just unrealistic. But part of the reason for their lack of conversions on 3rd down is because they're just not in 3rd and favorable scenarios. And that's tough to ask for any team. So that's kind of where I'm at with the 3rd down. But regardless, no matter how you get there, it's got to be better. Got to be better.
So Trev, some comment that somebody made in the chat, it's a fair comment to make, is that's a lot to accomplish in 3 weeks. And what I would say is I don't think that it is, because a lot of this stuff is stuff where we see it at times. It's a play here, it's a play there, it's a missed opportunity here, it's a missed opportunity there. It's not so much that they haven't shown any of this ability all year, and now we're expecting them to do it in the postseason. That would be unrealistic. Right, like that's like saying, like, okay, in 2017, okay, you need Brandon Wimbush to do this, and this throwing the football to win a championship. Well, that's not going to happen. Brandon was who he was. This is, hey, we just need this Riley Leonard that we saw in these 5 games to be more prominent. That, you know what I mean? We need the receivers and how they played in these 5 or 6 games to be more consistent, right? We need this pass offense that we saw rip up this decent pass defense to be that more frequently. Those are the things we talk about, where it's not that we're asking this team to do something that they have never done. It's not asking this team to do something that is, I don't know, man, against that kind of team. Are you really able to? No, we've seen you do it. It's now just do it more. Like, it's just, you've got to do it. It's got to become more important to who you are. And the fact that Notre Dame has looked so good at times this year is exactly why I think that it can be done. It's the fact that they were able to come out of the bye week and look so good early against Louisville, because they were able to clean up some of those things. And that's what this period is really going to be about. Last week was about rest. This week's going to be about, we need to sharpen up some stuff. And then next week will be even more so into the game plan. And it's going to be about, hey, listen, we got to make this read. You've got to make this throw. It's there. Take it. And so like one thing I didn't say, and we're not going to say, is the receivers got to do a much better job of winning a bunch of contested catches in the postseason. If it comes down to that happening, I don't know that Notre Dame's going to go very far.
Right.
That's just not who they've ever been. They've been a play here, a play there. Bo Collins had the one against A&M, and there's been a couple here and there, but that's just not who this team is. Mitchell Evans is that way. Eli Rarin could be that way. But asking Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison and Jaden Harrison and Bo Collins to do things they just haven't done with any like frequency or volume this season is not what's going to be a rest. If that's what they need, then they're just going to be in trouble. They need the empty offense to be light. Well, okay, that's like, I don't know how good that's going to be. You know what I mean? These are things we've seen you do for stretches this season. Now you have to do it and kind of be your best at it. Because the reality is, every team they're going to play from here on out, because no matter Notre Dame could potentially play all 11 teams, depending on some scenario. There's a potential for them to play all 11 of the other playoff teams, depending on who wins games. Every single team is flawed. Every single team was going to be, if the people that cover their team are honest and objective, are going to have a very similar show to this, where they got to do better here, they got to do better there. This is something that they're going to have to work on and get better at. But it's where I looked at it as a coach, when you go into big games or when your team is struggling or whatever, and as an analyst, it's like, look, we've seen you do this with some level of volume this year. Now you've just got to be more consistent at it, right? It's not like, hey, I watched, Jordan Faison make this one great catch in week 2. He didn't even play in week 2. I'm just making the point. So now I need him to do that 3-4 times a game in the postseason. No. I saw Bo Collins beat Stanford for a big play on a post route. I need him to do that a couple times a game. No. You need Bo to catch the stop routes, the comebacks, the digs, the hitches. That's what you need, the RPO glance routes. That's what you need Bo to do, right? You don't need him to go be something he isn't. I need Jaden Greathouse to be what he has been this year at his best. I need Jordan Faison to be what he's been this year when he's been at his best. Do what we've already seen you do. That's what we're talking about. That's what champions do. And that's what we're saying here is like we've seen this offense be good at times in pass pro. We've seen this offense be good at times attacking with downfield stuff, including the USC game. We're saying maybe ramp up the volume a little bit, maybe hit him a couple times early. Don't wait till you really need it. We've seen this receiving core have some really good moments this year. That's what we're saying is you've now got to see it to where it's, okay, fellas, we've seen you do this for 3-4 games in a row. We need you to do it for another 3-4 games in a row. And that's kind of what we're getting to. And I don't think it's actually a lot. This is just we know you can be this. We've seen you be this. You've now got to go be that here for these next 4 games.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, we're not asking any structural changes of the Notre Dame offense.
Right.
Like we're not, man, you got to find, we're not asking people to get faster, like all things that would be, off-season improvements. I mean, look, the stride that Notre Dame made from their first bye week to Stanford, it's all about cleaning up execution mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a lot of it is. What's dropping a pass? Not executing.
Right.
What's a holding penalty? Not executing. Like what's Riley Leonard missing a read? Not executing. Those are all mistakes that can be fixed. And honestly, I would even make the argument that 3 weeks is a lot of time to get that fixed because we've seen this team do it in a week. We watched this team in a span of 6 days lose to Northern Illinois and then beat an opponent by 59. So
right.
A week is a good amount of time to get these things done. It's not asking structural changes or, man, if Mike Denbrock can implement this formation in 3 weeks and get it running and clicking for the playoffs.
35 snaps of 21
right.
personnel. They're going to be able to beat everybody. Right.
So
build your offense around 21 personnel, and I promise you're going to win 4 games. It's not what we're saying. And Trev, I like the point you made too, is that this is also an offense that has shown at times within a week it can make those changes. I mean, you saw it from, like you said, from Northern Illinois to Purdue. I mean, Purdue's bad, but they're not that bad, where you go from 14 points against NIU to 66 points against 59 offensive points against Purdue, right? I mean, you were up 42-0 at halftime. 35 of those were from your offense. We saw it from Miami of Ohio to Louisville. I mean, we saw it in that game where Notre Dame looked really just kind of like, what are we doing here against Miami of Ohio? And then a week later, they come out against Louisville and they're throwing the ball down the field. They're hitting. I mean, we were so frustrated in the Miami of Ohio post game because of the comments that Marcus Freeman made before the game about, they dictate to you this and you got to be methodical. And we're just like, oh my gosh, I just want to throw up. I just want to barf. Like, this is so bad.
Yeah.
I cannot believe we're having this conversation. And then we come out a week later and I'm looking at the stats against Miami of Ohio. Hold on, find it here. Let me find. I did the Notre Dame against Miami of Ohio went 1 of 3 on balls past 20 yards. They had 1 drop, if you remember correctly. They only threw 8 passes total beyond 10 yards against them. Well, then you come out against Louisville, and early in the game, what do? They take a couple shots down the field. You have the big crossing route by Jaden Greathouse. You have the seam route for the touchdown to Jaden Greathouse. They didn't throw the ball a lot down the field, but they hit a couple plays early, and then the second half, as we talked about, they just kind of went into the, we're up. We're not going to make any mistakes. They couldn't protect the ball. But, so what do you do that next week? You come out and you're throwing the ball down the field and hit big plays, and you jump up on them 21-7, right? You made some adjustments in that regard. So that's kind of what we're talking about. I mean, Georgia Tech, I thought the offense was real sloppy in that game for stretches. I mean, you come out and then they kind of get rolling and they finish sloppy. And they come out a week later against Navy, and that offense is clicking like we haven't seen all year. A week later. That's the thing that's been so frustrating, is this up and down performance from this offense. Well, now you're in the postseason. You're rested. You've had time to make adjustments. You just need to be sort of in the best version of yourself, somewhere in that zone consistently. And that's what's going to take to win a championship. And if they can't do it, then they're probably not going to win a championship.
Right.
That's the whole point of this conversation, is that's what you need to do to win a championship.
Yep.
And the other thing I like is you're going to have extra time between each game now compared to the regular season. There's going to be at least 9-10 days between every game.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to help with this too. So, Trev, let's jump into the last part of our show. And this is going to be a little bit of fun. We're going to kind of go rapid fire here and just discuss these three things and what we're excited about. And we'll dive into each one. So I want to bring some up. I'll let you kind of talk about it. Then I'll give my thoughts on it, and we'll finish up with that. And then we'll do some super chats at the end, and then we'll get out of here because I think this has been a really good discussion. Yeah. But what are the three keys to success specifically for Notre Dame to go on a championship run? Because this whole conversation is not so much about Indiana. It's about Notre Dame competing for a championship. Indiana is part of that journey. We'll break down the specific matchup of them next week because we'll have all next week to break it down. This is more about Notre Dame focusing on Notre Dame. What are the three things that are going to be most important to this Notre Dame offense playing at a championship level for the next month plus of the season that leads to Notre Dame winning their 12th championship? And so that's what we're going to do next. And we're going to dive into that. And Trev, I think number one is super obvious and everyone's going to have it. Number one key, and we're not talking about things that you can't, these are things you can control. You can't control injuries and that. This is the things you can control. And that number one, the biggest key between Notre Dame now and over a month from now, hoisting up a national championship trophy, it's going to come down to number one, Riley Leonard's got to be the guy. He's got to be the best version of himself for the next month. He's got to be that guy that puts his team on his shoulders and says, follow me. You know what I mean? And if he can be that the Navy version of Riley Leonard, right? The fourth quarter Texas A&M version of Riley Leonard, the first half Louisville version of Riley Leonard, the second, third quarter version of Stanford Riley Leonard, the second, third quarter from Georgia Tech version of Riley Leonard. I'm not sure if I said this or not, but the whole Navy game version of Riley Leonard, the whole Army game version of Riley Leonard, the third quarter against USC version of Riley Leonard. If we can get that guy with some consistency this next month, I'll say this Notre Dame offense can move and score on anybody, at least enough to go out and win every game and compete for a championship.
Yeah.
You need to have that. At least 3 of the 4 games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you go back through and you look at every national championship team, and all quarterbacks are not created equally, but they all played the same role, right? Like Stetson Bennett looked different than Joe Burrow when he did it, and Mac Jones looked different from J.J. McCarthy when he did it. But what do they all have in common? You know what I'm saying? And so you kind of have to go through and look at what you need from Riley Leonard. And from a playing standpoint, he has shown it all year that he's had flashes. And as the season has gone on, those flashes have become more consistent, where the light's almost on. It really is almost there. And his stretch that he put together in his final 3 games, and then, you sprinkle the Navy game in there, leaves a lot of room for promise. But I've said this to everybody that's asked me about it. Do you think Riley Leonard can lead Notre Dame to a championship? I do, because now he's more comfortable in this system. And I know we're talking about things from this year, but you look at the experience that he had at Duke, where he was that team's offense. And he has had to play on teams where he had, like, if Riley Leonard wasn't being Riley Leonard, they're not beating Clemson week 1 of 2023. You know what I'm saying? So Notre Dame has a quarterback that has had the experience of having to be that guy. Now, this year, the learning curve, as funny as it is, the learning curve at the start of the season is he had to learn to not be that guy and trust the people around him. But like we've alluded to all show, the regular season is different than the playoffs. And there is going to be a moment. It could be a moment. It could be a game. It could be a quarter. It could be a series where there's going to come a time where, Denbrock's going to have to go up to number 13 on the sideline and say, hey, bud, we need you. This is why you come to Notre Dame. This is why we went out and got you in the portal. This is why your teams believe in you. This is why your coaching staff believes in you. We need you to go be the best version of yourself. And it's going to come down to that. Now, I don't know if it's going to be based on how this team is put together. It's not going to be all 4 games, right? Like it could, I'm not blind to that fact, but there will come a time where all of ND Nation, that entire team is going to look to number 13 and be like, all right, buddy, it's your time. Put it all together. We need you. And I think if Notre Dame makes a championship run and they do things that they haven't done in my lifetime, a lot of it is going to be reflecting on how number 13 played in this 4-game stretch.
Trevin, we've seen it. I mean, there are exceptions to the rule. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule in college football. J.J. McCarthy didn't have to put that team on his shoulders last year. But as you mentioned, in the second half against Alabama, when they were shutting the run game down, they needed to make some big plays. And I think of that ball he hit to Blake Corum, or not Blake Corum, but their slot receiver. I'm drawing a complete Roman Wilson. Right? Yeah. Just big time ball. But in a lot of other years, when you look at past champions and you look at how they performed in the postseason, it's like, okay, that explains it, right? I mean, look at Stetson Bennett in 2021, 2022 when they won their second championship. You look at and when I think championship, you've got to beat LSU in the SEC title game first, right? And he goes out there and goes 23 of 29 for 274 yards and 4 touchdowns. First round playoff semifinal game against Ohio State in a game where his defense could not stop Ohio State. You've got to be big time. He throws for 398 yards and 3 touchdowns in that game. Also rushed for a touchdown in that game. National championship game against TCU, he's lights out, 72% completions, 304 yards, 4 touchdowns. 2021, similar deal. You go through the entire regular season, and Stetson Bennett did not have a single game of over 300 yards. His highest passing total was 288 yards against UAB, right? His next highest total was 255 yards at Georgia Tech. In the postseason against Alabama, he throws for 340 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a loss. Goes out against Michigan, a really good Michigan defense, throws for 313 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then goes 65.4%, 224 yards and 2 touchdowns, no picks, no turnovers against Alabama in the national title game. Completely rebounds, put up a bunch of yards in the first game, 7.1 yards per attempt, 2 interceptions. Championship game rematch, 8.6 yards per attempt, up to completion percentage by 5 points, 2 touchdowns, no picks, right? You look at Mac Jones in 2020. As good as Mac Jones was, you know what game he had his highest output of the season was? His highest yardage output of the season was in the national title game against Ohio State. Mm-hmm. He completed over 80% of his passes in those 2 games, and he also ripped Florida up in a game in the SEC title game where your defense is struggling. You give up 46 points to Florida. He passes for 418 yards and 5 touchdowns. Right? Put that team on his shoulders. We remember what Joe Burrow did in 2019. We don't got to rehash that. Trevor Lawrence, is a true freshman in 2018. Goes through the season. He's a good player, 24 touchdowns, 4 picks in the regular season. He only throws for 118 yards in a blowout title game win over Pitt. Never really challenged. He had some games where he put up some yardage, but never really challenged during the regular season. Got knocked out of the only game against a ranked opponent they played all year where he was the starter. He came off the bench against A&M. Goes out in the postseason, he passes for 327 yards and 3 touchdowns against Notre Dame, and was smart enough when he saw Julian Love out to say, I'm throwing at that guy. And then in the title game against Alabama, throws for 347 yards and 3 touchdowns, right? I think of Jacob Coker in 2015 for Alabama. Guy was a mediocre quarterback the entire season. Most yards he'd thrown in a game that year was 262. The next highest total he had was 247. That cat only passed for over 200 yards in 6 games, half the games in the regular season. He goes out in the semifinal game against Michigan State and throws for the most yards he's thrown for all season, 286 yards and 2 touchdowns. And guess what? Wasn't even close to the best he would play in the postseason. Goes out there against Clemson in the title game, passes for 335 yards and 2 touchdowns. That guy, literally the 2 best games that kid ever played in college were in the national semifinals and the national championship game. Right? Like, that's what the great teams do. And that's what champions do, is their quarterbacks step up and say, hey, we're going to do this thing. Now, none of those guys had to do it for 4 games. But there's a reason I brought up the SEC title games and the ACC title games and some of those, because you have to win that one to get there. So I don't expect Riley to do it for 4 games the way that Jacob Coker did. He only had to play 2. But you're going to need him to at least be that guy for 2 games, at least twice, if not 3 times. Riley Leonard's going to have to play his best football if this team is going to win. And that's where we're at. Number 2, Trev, and this is also plays into it, but Mike Denbrock has to be the aggressor in the postseason. No more take what the defense gives you that we saw early in the season. You've got to go out and say, hey, we're going to take the fight to you. We're going to attack you with tempo. We're going to be willing to attack you down the field if we see those opportunities. We're going to do things to get the ball to you, and we're not going to go away from what we do best. We're just going to find great ways to do it, right? We're not going to come out and be afraid to run the ball at you, but we're going to find ways to gash you with the run. We're going to attack you. We're going to be aggressive. If Mike Denbrock and Marcus Freeman has to allow him to do that, or if not encourage him to do that, say, hey, listen, no more methodical this, methodical that. We're going to take the fight to this team. That doesn't mean you're coming out looking like Oregon 2010 and you're throwing a bunch of bombs, but you are the tone setter, whether that's up in the tempo, whether that's taking some shots early if they present them there. If it's you're up by 7 and you get the ball back with a minute left, don't take a knee and go up 7. Be aggressive. Go for it. Go up 14 or 10 going into halftime. Those are things we're talking about, Trevor. You got a team, and this is what Texas did not do against Georgia. They had their boot on their throat, or they had a chance to put their boot on their throat against Georgia early in the game, and they didn't do it. They coached scared of Georgia's front 7. Steve Sarkisian, great mind, but he coached like he was afraid of the matchup between his lines and the Georgia lines, and he didn't have answers for it. And so you had a chance to put that team away, and you couldn't do it. You can't make that mistake against Notre Dame, because what you and I said in the pregame show going into the Texas game is whatever you think about Georgia this year, overrated, all that, which I think that they are, that team has never – I've yet to see one game this year, even the Ole Miss game where they just got whooped. They didn't quit. They were down big against 28-0 Alabama and just battled back. 17-0 to Georgia Tech, battled back. You know, they were getting whooped a little bit early by Tennessee and just kept fighting. That team will not quit on you. You better be up more than 9-3 at halftime if you're outgaining them 200 something to 90, which is what it was at halftime of the Georgia game against Texas. You have got to but that requires you to say, hey, we're going to go down swinging. If we're not going to win this thing, it's not going to be because, well, we were conservative, didn't want to make mistakes. No, you don't want to make mistakes. You got to protect the football. But that doesn't mean coaching scared or coaching passive. There's a difference between unnecessarily aggressive and taking the fight to your opponent. They got to take the fight to their opponent. And however that looks. And that's going to be a big dictate to what's the word? It's offense. Go on offense. Go on an offensive against the other team. Don't let them dictate to you what's going to happen. That's what I want to see. It starts with the head coach. The OC's got to carry it out, and then your players got to execute that game plan. It's got to be mentality every single day. How we've seen this team play the last 2 months, I think they're going to be there. But it's like you said about SMU in the ACC title game. Just because you've been this way during the regular season doesn't mean you're going to be that way when the title's on the line. And that's what we need to see is we need to say, don't lose. Matter of fact, be hungrier now than you were when you were playing teams that you were better than, like way better than. That's where I'm yeah, Jason, I was getting ready to say be offensive, but I was like, nope, that's not going to sound right. So I had to switch a little bit. So go on the offensive.
Yeah. No, I was waiting for that to come out, and I was like, all right, I'm going to see how this ends. But no,
Almost said it.
Well, look, man, I agree with you. Notre Dame needs to play offense, and I'm in some of the best games offensively that they've done, and I'll provide some examples soon. But what Notre Dame needs to do on offense is play like they don't have a top 5 defense. You know, like the one thing that I noticed, like that was kind of something that hindered Texas is they kind of went into a shell and they just relied on their defense being good. That's why their offense started to sputter. Partially, I mean, it was a really, really lazy run game setup for Texas in the SEC championship game, and like a lot of the things that they were doing, but they kind of were just under that impression of like, oh, our defense is good, so they'll get a stop. Don't play like that, because in the games where Notre Dame's defense has not played like they did against a Stanford or just completely shutting down the teams like they did for the majority of the season, we saw some of Notre Dame's best offensive performances, right? You go back and you think to the Louisville game on September 28th, and the defense gave up a touchdown, albeit on a short field, you know what I mean? But then on, their longest field, luckily it ended in a turnover, but Tyler Shuck rips off a 40-some-odd yard run. So it kind of showed to the offense, this offense might be able to kind of move the ball a little bit on this defense. We got to go out and hold our own. What they do, hang 21 points in the first quarter. right? You go back and look at what they did at USC against USC. And it was a day where from very early on, even though they forced a turnover on downs on their first drive, the Notre Dame defense was looking like it wasn't going to be as it was the rest of the year. So what did the offense do? They scored 35 points in 3 quarters. So take that energy and move it into the playoffs. Don't play like you have I guess if we don't, our kick coverage teams have been pretty good and our defense is really good. No, dude, go out and dictate the pace of the game on offense. Make them play to your standard. Force a team into a position where they have to play from behind, because that is when your defense is the most dangerous. It makes offenses one-dimensional. And what's the best part of this Notre Dame defense? It's pass defense. So offense has to go out and dictate the pace, be the aggressor, and never be satisfied with how many points you put on the board. Couldn't agree more.
One thing that hurt them against USC is that they offensively first allowed USC back in that game. And as long as USC could keep it within a score, they could run their offense. They could run the ball. And Notre Dame had to play them straight up. There was never that time where they jumped out to a 2-3 score lead where they knew a pass was coming and they could heat USC up. Why were they able to kind of make that big turnover, those couple turnovers late in the game? Because they knew USC had to throw the football. And so they heat them up a little bit and force some of those mistakes that led them to put that game away. And a lot of that's on the offense, not making that fumble mistake like they had, right? So you can't make those kind of mistakes. You got to, and that's what I loved about the offense against USC. I thought the offense came out aggressive, and they ran hard at them. They were going to take a shot down the field. They had a corner fire, so the quarterback's got to make somebody miss and go make a play, right? I mean, those are all things that you got to see. And I thought they were aggressive. I mean, look, you need to have the same mindset now in the postseason that you had in the regular season. We're going to blow everybody out if we can. This isn't we're trying to win by. Look, winning by 1 is all that matters. But don't change the mindset that led you to be what you've been the last 2 months, which is we're going to come out and we're going to bury you. I don't care. Oh yeah, you're the number 10 seed and you're the number 2 seed. Don't care. We're Notre Dame. You're not. We're going to take it to you, and that's what I want to see from this offense. And then the final thing is, Trev, they got to be great in situational football. 3rd down, red zone, turnover battle, fast starts, that situational football, coming out situations where you're getting the ball at your own 12. You got to get a couple first downs to at least flip the field. If you do punt, you got to punt where you're flipping the field. That middle 8 period of the game, right? Last 4, first 4, that Notre Dame's been incredibly dominant in the regular season. You've got to be that again in the postseason. Situational football, Trev, is going to be super important for this offensive football team.
Yeah, it's going to be massive. The battlefield position, the turnover battle. Put yourself in positions to win as many matchups as you possibly can, right? I mean, you go through situational football. Again, I've been harping on it. The dumb penalties have to go away because those put you out of a position where you're playing situational football. Don't be in a spot where you're playing catch-up. Win the early downs, right? Situational football. Convert on 3rd downs. Win in the red zone. Ideally touchdowns, right? It's taking advantage of every opportunity that you have offensively, right? I go and think of the special teams has ran a bunch of awesome fakes this year. And I think out of all of them that they've ran, they've gotten a field goal out of all of them, right? Take advantage of those opportunities when they come to you. Be really good situationally. I couldn't have said it better myself. I agree, Brian.
Those are the 3 keys. I mean, now those are a little bit all-encompassing. Riley Leonard playing really well also means the pass pro is better, means the receivers are catching the football. I mean, those are all things that kind of go into it, but that's really what it comes down to, Trev. If they can do those things, this team is going to be really good. Yep. They're going to be really hard to stop. Before we get out of here, Trev, we did have 4 super chats that I want to get to. This one says, Aiden Benami, thank you for the super chat, Aiden. I continue to receive hate messages from my IU brethren. IB Nation has my back right, of course, as always. Prayed for any other matchup, but this one, Lord Father, let's win. Because Aiden is a big, I believe, Aiden, you're a big IU basketball fan. He's one of those, Trev, that you've talked about. Guys that are like IU grads or IU basketball fans, but they're Notre Dame football fans. But, yeah, so we got your back, man, no doubt.
Yeah, look, Aiden, the one thing that I will say is I've had a couple of other friends that are Notre Dame football fans, IU basketball fans, but are rooting for the IU football team in this game because they like the basketball team, and to which I respond, so you're just an IU fan. Right. That's fine. So, Aiden, hats off to you. If you are going to be a split fan, root for that respective team
in that season.
Yep.
Right.
So I'm with you. We got your back, dude.
Yep, of course. Michael S., we'll talk more about this if it happens. I don't really care to spend a lot of energy on discussing what would happen if they lose. But I'll just give you a quick yes or no. Would a loss to IU mean a disappointing season? No. There's a difference between you didn't reach your potential as a team, which would be true if they do lose to Indiana, and it being a disappointing season. You just went 11-1. You're in the college football playoff berth. You're going to be playing at home. Should you be better than a one and done? Absolutely. Would it make for a disappointing season? No. Would it be a disappointing end to the season? Yes. Would it make for a disappointing season? No. Would it mean that this team did not achieve the success it should have? Yes, but I don't view that as a disappointment. I don't view that as unsuccessful. It just means it wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And then we can go back to the drawing board and figure out what do they need to do to get there next year. But no, it would not be a disappointing season.
Agreed.
So here's a super chat from Michael S. Didn't Army have a top rushing defense? How does it compare to the IU defense?
I mean, it's a tough comparison. So like I went through and I dove down into some of the stats, and a lot of it is respective to who you play, because on one hand you have Army, right, who is a group of 5 school and is playing a bunch of teams in the AAC, whereas IU is, well, they play in the Big Ten and they have, it's interesting, right? Because, there's 8 teams above 500 in the Big Ten. IU played 2 of them, lost 1, beat 1, right? And then you go through and you dive into offensively where a lot of the teams rank that they played. And like I said, I mean, there's 104, 131, 106, 118, 123, 110, and then another team tied for 110. The best rushing offense that they played statistically all year was Ohio State at number 59. So, it's tough. It doesn't make them a bad defense. Let me get that clear, right? Like it doesn't mean IU has a bad defense. They still have a really good rush defense, but I think it is also fair to say they haven't faced a rushing attack like Notre Dame's. So you kind of have to look at things respectively. It's the same thing with Army, right? Army didn't allow, I think Army came into the Notre Dame game allowing 1 rush of over 20 yards or more and 0 rushes of 30 or more. And 2 of Notre Dame's touchdowns were 30 or more. So I'm not saying they're going to repeat and do the same things to IU, because I think that, a Washington, a Nebraska, a Michigan are still better rushing offenses than what Army faced in the AAC. So, Michael S., I guess, 1, thank you for the super chat, but 2, my answer to that is just it's tough to gauge because their level of opponents are different when you're talking about those 2 defenses respectively.
I would say they're very similar because of what you said, Trevor, and that's kind of the point of it, right? I mean, neither of them are very big. I'll have I'm going to have Indiana's depth chart out. Just so you all know, by the way, I'm going to put an unofficial depth chart out for both teams to maybe later today, but definitely tomorrow, no later than tomorrow, where I don't care what they say the depth chart is. I'm looking at the games, who plays, who's in there, who's hurt, and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to put a depth chart out. When you look at Army's defensive front, it's very quick, it's very athletic, it's undersized. I don't know that it's as big man for man as what Army's front was. Mikhail Kamara, who's a heck of a player, transfer from James Madison, first-year guy. He was an all Big Ten guy, 6'1", 265. Their other end, Linnell Carr Jr., 2-year transfer from West Virginia, meaning this is the second year, 6'2", 246. Their 3-technique, James Carpenter, first-year guy from James Madison. He's 6'2", 288, so Howard Cross type of size. And then they got C.J. West, who's a first-year guy from Kent State, who's 6'2", 317. Their 2 inside linebackers are 6'1", 233, 6'1", 218, and then they'll also play Elijah Hardy a decent amount at Rover and inside. He's 5'11", 225. Their corners are 5'9", and 5'11". They're not a real big team. They're quick, they're athletic, they're incredibly well coached, and they play really hard. The thing you have to understand about this Indiana team is they took a bunch of the best players from the G5 level. James Madison, Old Dominion, Ohio U. There's 2 guys from Ohio U. There's a guy from Kent State, a whole bunch of guys from James Madison, a guy from Old Dominion. And they took the best from that level, and they still play with that G5 chip on their shoulder. And they're really smart, and they're really experienced, and that makes them a good team. Usually when you have a bunch of new transfers coming in, they don't play well together. But 5 of their transfers are from James Madison on defense. Starters are from James Madison. I mean, and the D coordinator came from James Madison. So basically you have 5 starters on your defense who are multi-year starters in this system. That has helped. And they play with a big-time chip on their shoulder. But again, they're not the biggest. They're not the most explosive. They're not, there's not a lot of first-round NFL draft picks in that group, but they play really good football. And it's exactly what we said about Army. Could Notre Dame run on Army? Of course. Are they just going to roll Army? No. They have to earn it. And guess what? They earned it. They blocked. They played incredibly well against Army. And it's going to be the same thing here. They're going to have to block hard. They're going to have to be disciplined. They're going to have to play with great timing. They're going to have to move their feet, use their hands. Backs are going to have to make good reads. If they do that, can they run on Army? Sure they can. But it's going to be earned because this is a more talented, athletic version of Army, but they're not quite as big and strong as Army. It's kind of how, does that make sense? I mean, I don't know. You've watched them both on film. Do you agree with that? I think this team is more athletic than what Army was.
Yes.
They're just as disciplined defensively, schematically as Army was. This team is not as big and strong as Army was, especially strong as Army was. And then Army was missing one of their best defensive linemen in that game as well, which we can't remember. One of their edge players didn't play in that game either. It wouldn't have mattered. I mean, so they would have averaged 8.5 yards a carry instead of 9.5 yards a carry.
Right.
But it just at least needs to be pointed out.
Yeah, I agree with that analysis. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good one there, Michael S. Thank you for that. And then last one here, super chat here is from AST12321. Trev, Indiana has a highly ranked rush defense, but so did Army. Do we expect IU will be able to force Notre Dame to pass more than they want, or should Notre Dame lean on them? This is a little bit of a different way of getting to that question. And I think the answer, and I'll let you address it first, is they're certainly going to try, and Notre Dame has to have a plan for that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to the conversation that we had earlier in the show is your dudes have to be dudes. At some point in the playoffs, I'm not expecting Riley Leonard to start popping off for 350 yards a game. You have to do what got you here, and that's running the football. So I do expect IU to load the box, and I do expect IU to try to stop the run. And 12 other teams tried to do that to Notre Dame this year, and they couldn't. So that's not my prediction for the game. It's just this isn't going to be the first matchup that Notre Dame has had this year where all of a sudden a team's going to try to stop the run. They have faced this for 12 straight games. And right now, opponents against Notre Dame's rush defense or rushing offense is 0 for 12. So I think
Louisville did a pretty good job of shutting down Notre Dame's run game.
Yeah.
And the difference is Louisville took a lot of chances in that game, and they worked. They're a very undisciplined, aggressive defense, and when it works, they look great, and when it doesn't, it looks like Miami.
Sure.
Right? And so it's like athletically, I think this team is more on line with what Louisville was athletically. They're not nearly as big as Louisville was. This team is more along the lines of Army from a discipline standpoint and a coaching standpoint.
Sure.
So that's what I say. They're nothing like Georgia Tech, who also slowed down. They don't have 300-pounders in the middle that can kind of eat up 2 blocks like Zeke Biggers did. CJ West is a nice player. He's not that. You know what I mean? As long as you play your game anyway, he's not that, I should say.
Sure.
So that's the thing. You look at it, Trev. It's like, what version are you going to get of Notre Dame, right? I mean, that's kind of part of what you're looking at is, do you allow the big guy up the middle to push you around like you did Zeke Biggers, or do you move him like you have other teams, right? I mean, that's going to be the question mark, right? Can you find ways to run on their edge players who are short, stout guys, that can be moved? Can you find ways to do that? Those are going to be the question marks. But look, the thing about it is, the cold to me doesn't really affect throwing the ball nearly as much as people think it does if you are someone who has decent sized hands. And from everything I've seen from Riley Leonard and Curtis Rourke, I don't think either one of them seem to have like small hands. And the reason I say that is because when you have small hands, cold causes your skin to shrink. And if you have small hands, you get a little bit of it's harder to get as good of a grip on a cold ball, and your skin is softer, or not as harder and shortens. So you have to take that into consideration. But when you are, if you have bigger hands, cold is it's cold. You keep your hands warm, you blow on them, and you're fine. I mean, I've seen John Elway light teams up in the postseason for the Broncos from time to time. But here's where it gets troubling is when you have a combination of cold and wind. And the problem that you're going to have in the game from what we're going to see is you're going to have, it's projected to be over 10 miles an hour wind factor in that game. And as you know, being in Notre Dame Stadium, it can swirl. And so part of me says, as long as the wind's not too bad, I won't be shocked if Notre Dame comes out and tries to reverse engineer their offense a little bit, which we've seen them do at times, where they kind of come out and say, this first couple series, we're going to come out and we're going to do some things, move in the pocket, throwing the ball to back you up or maybe take a chance and hit a big play against your run-heavy scheme here. And then when we soften you up, then we're going to kind of come back with the running game. But if the wind is really swirling, then you may not be able to do that, and you're going to have to find ways to run the football. At the end of the day, you're going to have to find ways to run the football. And this is a team that is going to make you work for that. But it's not a team that's just going to go overwhelm you with, like I said, a bunch of first-round NFL draft picks. But this is an incredibly disciplined defense. And if you make mistakes, they will make you pay. That's what it boils down to.
Yeah.
But Army was the same way. And the reason that Notre Dame had so much success against Army is because Notre Dame did not make mistakes. The timing of the run game was the blocking in the run game was exceptional. I mean, it was really, really good. Their ability to kind of come out and just work the double teams and get to the second level and do all those things was really good. And the discipline that Notre Dame was able to match their discipline, and that's when the talent took over. And if they can do that, then I think they'll have a shot to do that. But, I mean, Indiana's going to try to force Notre Dame to throw the football early. Does Notre Dame oblige that and come out with a game plan kind of designed to soften Indiana up and make this a perimeter game against a pretty quality secondary that, again, it's a good secondary, doesn't have a lot of first-round draft picks on it. That's the whole point. And so that can you take – but Notre Dame also doesn't have a lot of first-round draft picks on their receiving core either. That's why we talked about Mitchell Evans needing to be a big factor, and then soften them up and then come back to the run game. Well, sure, that could work, but whatever you do, you better find success. So because Notre Dame's defense during this 2-month stretch, we'll talk about it on Thursday, has not been a great first 2 series defense for a while now, and so you can't fall behind a team like this 10-0, 14-0. Whatever you do, you got to come out and get points. But Notre Dame's going to have to be able to run football. You can't go into the postseason as good as they are running football and just say, well, we're going to let you take it away. You know, and Notre Dame didn't get here because teams were able to just like there were times under past coordinators where if teams came out with a real run-heavy defensive game plan, and honestly, we saw that a couple times from Mike Denbrock in September, that they would just start throwing the ball over the place. Out of the break, Mike Denbrock said, no, we're going to run the ball. No matter, we're going to find ways to run the ball. However, sometimes that meant coming out early and throwing the ball a little bit and softening them up. I mean, I think the first 3 or 4 plays of the Stanford game, they threw the football, and we're moving the chains that way. You've got to be able to find ways to get early points and not let them completely take away what you do best. But that doesn't mean if they're going to overplay their hand that you can't or shouldn't find ways to hurt them in other areas. So if they do force Notre Dame out, then Notre Dame needs to make them pay for it. That's the big key. Because USC tried to do that in 2017. Do you remember? Early in the game, Notre Dame, I think, went 3 and out on their first drive against USC. And USC was able to kind of get that stop. And then Notre Dame, what broke that game open? You had a reverse to Kevin Stepherson, but you had 2 shots down the field that Brandon Wimbush took. That's what really broke that game open. He hit that post route to EQ for a touchdown, and then he hit the back shoulder to Kevin Stepherson, and that's what really got him going. Yeah, they went 3 plays for -1 yards on that first drive, and that's really kind of what broke it open a little bit. You had a 12-yard run by Brandon Wimbush on a scramble, 13-yard run on a reverse to Kevin Stepherson, and then a 26-yard touchdown pass. And that kind of spooked them a little bit. And then Notre Dame comes out that next series, they're running the ball a lot better, and then of course they hit that back shoulder touchdown for a 23-yard touchdown, and USC was kind of shook at that point in time. They didn't know what to do. And that's when the run game started to really take over that game. So that's a big part of what they're going to need to do in this game is just you've got to find a way to, in December, in the cold, in the wind, you got to be able to run the football. Got to find ways to run the football.
100%. Got to have an answer.
So, Trev, man, that's going to do it. Why don't you go ahead and take us out of here, man?
Yeah, you got it. Well, us here at Irish Breakdown are going to have a lot of content coming out. You guys know that. We're just as excited as you guys are that Notre Dame is going to be hosting the first college football playoff game at somebody's home field, and we're going to do that justice. I'm super pumped about it. I know that you guys are. But in order to be in the now, in order to know everything that's going on, be sure to subscribe to us at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We're going to have awesome content coming out all week. And of course, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast with friends and family and anybody that you know loves Notre Dame as much as you do. So for Brian, I'm Trevor. We will see you guys back here next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast.